Very true.
I'll catch you one of these days.
All right, I'm getting a thumbs up here so we can get started. This morning we start with the Planning and Development Committee meeting. So I am going to go to Director Knodel to chair that one. Go ahead, please, Rick.
Thank you, Chair Pendergraft, and welcome to the Thursday, June 1st, 2023 Planning and Development Committee. Looking for a motion to accept the agenda. Moved, Director Pendergraft. Is there a seconder? Seconder, Director Graham. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. First item, delegate from Penticton Vacation Rentals, CAO Newell, would you care to enlighten us?
Yes, I would, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have the great honor this morning of having Blake Lavin with us, the Director of Development Services for the City of Penticton. We're all interested in housing these days, and the short-term rentals have an impact on that. We have some inconsistencies in how we are treating them these days, and we're about to go into our own study. So the City of Penticton has just recently come out with a study of their own on short-term rental benefits and the impact of them. So Mr. Lavin has graciously agreed to come and present what they had found out, because that will eventually have an impact on what we do. So we'll turn it over to him, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Lavin, please.
Thank you very much, and the honor is all mine. Thanks for that introduction, Bill. Great to see everybody. It's actually my first time presenting to this committee, so yeah, nice to see everybody today. So I am speaking about a recent study that was done for the City of Penticton on the benefits and impacts of short-term rentals on our community. Before I get into the results of the study, I just wanted to provide a bit of background on short-term rentals in our community and our regulatory program that we have that the study was looking at. So Penticton has a long history of dealing with vacation rentals. Back in the 80s and 90s, you would see these types of advertisements in the newspaper during Peach Fest and Ironman weekends. I think there was all sorts of stories about people giving up their homes to the vacationing public during the summer and paying their entire mortgage for the year based on that. But we've really seen in the past 10 years this shift with the emergence of vacation rental by owner online and the Airbnb websites come up. The convenience and the ease of being able to put your home up for rental, and then the professionalization of this industry. So we've long history of vacation rentals, but more recently we're seeing this accelerate, as you're seeing all across the province and the country right now. Tourism, obviously in the DNA of Penticton, even more so in the past couple decades with the construction of the South Okanagan Event Center, with the emergence of so many different events and new events like the Wine Fest and Elvis Fest and Ignite the Arts and the Dragon Boat Festival and the return of Ironman. The Canadian Sports School hockey tournament that we have every year now. So we are seeing the growth of events and just the importance of tourism to the Penticton economy growing more, and the type of events and the type of tourism is really changing. At the same time as we're seeing this this rise in events and tourism in Penticton, we're also seeing a loss of a lot of our traditional hotel and motel. We've lost over 200 motel hotel units in the past 10 years, and that's both with conversion to long-term housing as well as the demolition of motels and different types of land uses taking those up. We are seeing construction of new hotels and different types of units, but even with the new construction, we've lost almost 200 units over the past 10 years. And then talked about this a little bit, but just the change in the trends of tourism. Whereas you had a family of 4 that may want to come visit Penticton in the summer, they used to come here and stay at a motel or maybe one of the campsites that no longer exist. Now they're looking for vacation rental, Airbnb. These types of tourists aren't necessarily going to stay at the lakeside resort or stay in a hotel. They're looking for something that's more private, more comfortable. And this is the type of tourism that we can't afford to lose in Penticton. So we really do need to embrace this, this new trend if we want to stay as a leader in tourism in our area. As all these trends were gaining speed in 2008, 9, 10, we didn't really have any type of regulation for short-term rental. The only tourist accommodations in residential areas were about the 10 or so licensed bed and breakfasts. Bed and breakfasts were a little bit different, and to start a bed and breakfast, you had to go through a zoning process. You could have signage on the property, requirements for parking, and you're really creating commercial units within those residential areas. And once a bed and breakfast gets established, it's a permanent commercial unit within that residential setting, much different than the vacation rental, which can turn on and off and be commercial and go back into residential within a number of years. So slightly different. That was the only legal vacation type rental that we had in residential areas. But we did have, as I mentioned before, a massive amount of unlicensed vacation rentals, and really saw that increasing and increasing. Really uneven enforcement. The only time we would go in and enforce these when we would get complaints from neighbors on big party houses. 20 people would show up and rent out a house, and then we'd get all these calls, and then spending massive amounts of time trying to prove that they were running a vacation rental and trying to shut them down. So there's all this stuff going on. We had calls for regulations from a number of different areas. We had property owners that said, look, we've been operating this vacation rental for years. We've never had a complaint. We want a legal way to do this. We had complaints from neighbors that were concerned about the quiet enjoyment of their property. They said, look, I don't mind. Most of the people, this vacation rental has been going forever, never complained about it, but the last 2 weekends there was these big parties and it's just not fair. So they want quiet enjoyment of their property. From a staff perspective, we wanted more enforcements and tools and a cost recovery method for all the efforts that we were putting in here. And then the Travel Marketing Association was very mixed on this. There was this competition for hotels and motels, but at the same time, I think the Travel Marketing Association understood this emerging new trend and the importance that vacation rentals have on tourism. So they were really pushing to have a level playing field so that when Airbnbs were there, they were paying their fair share, they were safe, they were contributing, not being this negative impact. So all these different groups calling for more regulation. Staff took that, we developed what we felt was a really strong program goal. And when we originally developed this program, we didn't have the same concerns. We had a much healthier vacancy rate in Penticton in 2010, 11, 12 when we were developing this program. So our goal was really to ensure that if people were renting these units out, they were safe units, they were inspected by our inspectors, they had proper egress routes, and we had rules in place to protect neighbors from any nuisances. And that's really what the program goal was. Safe, give property owners the ability to rent these, and make sure that nuisances were minimized. And I would say very successful when you measure the program against that goal. When we put our program in, it was our zoning bylaw. We made amendments to allow vacation rentals in almost every residential zone in the city. And then we had regulations within our business license bylaw that set the rules. 5 years after we set the program up, we did a number of changes based on feedback that we got. We further limited the numbers of people that could stay in certain types of vacation rentals. We required people to put signage if they were having a vacation rental. That gave neighbors the ability to know that a vacation rental was in that neighborhood, as well as contact information if there were any issues. And we shifted from, there used to be a $200 yearly tourism fee that went to Travel Penticton. That got changed when the province brought in the online accommodation platform tax. So 5 years later, did a number of changes. And more recently, in 2018-19, we did a big branding exercise. Councillor Miller, you had a question?
Yes, if the money doesn't go to Travel Penticton anymore, where does it go?
Yeah, good question. So before there was a destination tax collected on vacation rentals, to try to create that level playing field, because the hotels and motels did have a MRDT tax that was collected. So we made short-term rentals pay a $200 marketing fee that went to Travel Penticton. The province started collecting that tax on short-term rentals about 5 or 6 years ago. And the province said you could either use that for destination marketing, or you can use it for affordable housing to try to offset some of the negative impacts on your housing. So 2 years ago, Penticton made the decision to shift that money from Travel Penticton to affordable housing. So this will be the first year that we've collected the full year, and I'll get to it in a bit, but we're anticipating close to $200,000 of tax collected from short-term rentals that'll go towards affordable housing. And because we were taking it from Travel Penticton, that money is supposed to be geared towards housing that's going to help the hospitality tourism industry. So the intent is not just affordable housing in general, but a project specifically geared towards workers that work in the hospitality industry. Yeah, just continuing on. So 2018-19, we went through this branding exercise, focused on a guide to help people that were interested in operating a short-term rental, how to do that in a legal way. We had pamphlets that are required to be in every short-term rental, so that when people are visiting Penticton, they know what the expectations are in the community. So a very successful branding exercise. And then also a bit of a shaming exercise, just encouraging people to stay in licensed, not unlicensed vacation rentals. In the past few years, obviously with the tightening of the rental and the housing market overall, when we were doing our OCP between 2016, 17, 18, and ultimately adopted in 2019, there was an acknowledgement in our OCP that vacation rentals probably are having a negative impact on our housing, and we really need to monitor that. So this policy statement was put in the OCP that we really need to keep an eye on what impact the short-term rentals were having on our long-term housing market. And that in part led to this study that I'm here to talk about today. So council was really interested, and I think around the time council gave us direction to do this study, they were looking at some other communities that were strengthening their program or even just starting their own regulatory programs. So we saw a lot of communities take, I'd say Penticton's quite permissive, just given our tourism identity here, very permissive on the short-term rentals. You saw a lot of other communities take a much more strict approach to these. So I think our council wanted to explore how other communities were approaching this and really understand what impact these were having. So they gave us direction to do this study. We did RFP. We ended up hiring EcoPlan, who I think most of the people around the table might know. EcoPlan did the regional housing needs assessment, and I know they've done some other work for the RDOS. So we're really happy with the work that they did on this project. The final report was submitted in April 2023 and just recently presented to our city council. So I apologize to the councillors are here that have seen this presentation already. Our recommendation to council was to increase enforcement efforts, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Also to look at a new classification system, as well as to refer this to our OCP housing task force for any further policy changes. And for the most part, those staff recommendations were accepted. As well, we also had council want to see us take more effort at going after the websites themselves, like the Airbnbs and the HomeAway and the FlipKey and all those websites, and hold them more accountable for advertising unlicensed units. So just going into the high-level study findings, and I can share a copy of the report with Chris. I'm sure he has it already, but we can send that around. It is a very interesting study. Yeah, question?
Director Coyne from Princeton. You said you were have you started talks with like Airbnb and those guys? Like, have they been receptive to that?
Yeah, really good question. We haven't talked to them recently. Back in 2010 and 11, when we were first developing our regulatory program, we had regular discussions with Airbnb. Just that one website. There's probably 24 websites that do these online accommodation websites, but Airbnb, they were really cooperative until we started talking about regulation and requiring business licensing, and then they really just kind of walked away. So I think we want to re-engage in those discussions with them. I talk about it in a bit, but I'll bring it up now. I'm sure many people have seen what happened in Quebec. The Quebec government, because of an incident with people perishing in an unlicensed vacation rental, the province of Quebec brought forward legislation that only requires the online accommodation platforms like Airbnb, Flipkey, those companies. They're only allowed to list licensed Airbnbs, and to be licensed, you need to be inspected, you need to follow the rules. $100,000 fine for listing unlicensed. I think it would be really difficult for us as a municipality to fine Airbnb. Something we want to explore, I think, but really looking towards the province to give us more tools for enforcement. It would be great if Airbnb would share addresses with us. Everything's anonymous. It's really difficult for us to kind of track down because when they list on these sites, you never see the address. It's just beautiful 3-bedroom lakefront, da-da-da. We don't know what the address is. We can find it out. It takes a long time to try to piece that together, investigate that. We actually hire a third-party software program that finds out the addresses for us. But it would be really nice if there was some provincial legislation that said you have to share this information with the municipalities or the regional districts. So, but yeah, good question. So yeah, we'll share the report with everybody. I'm just going to talk about really high level findings. We got some great information from this report. There was the first bit of information: how many vacation rentals do we have in Penticton? Seems like a really easy question to answer. And if you were to ask me before this report came out, I would say, we have 322 licensed vacation rentals in our community. That's one way of looking at the number that you have, but there's many other ways. I think they look at 5 different ways of doing this. If you go on Airbnb, in the summer, there's over 500 listed. Well, that's that 40% gap of unlicensed. If we only have 300 and some odd business licenses and there's 500 rented, those are 2 different ways of looking at it. And there's a lot of unlicensed ones in our community. That's a problem. That's something that we need to fix. Other ways that they look at it, so out of that 500, it could be just people that have rooms in their house or people that are away for the weekend that want to help pay for their trip, so they put their house up. So one way to look at it, and I think this is what the consultants really brought to it, is how to look at these things. So they looked at what an equivalent hotel room would be like. So if we're looking at the impact of short-term rentals on our hotel industry, we need to understand like-for-like comparison. So they said, based on their analysis, that in Penticton you have about 275 short-term rentals that would be equivalent to a hotel unit, and that's your kind of direct competition with hotel units. They also looked at rental units, so long-term rental units. Again, they set that number at about 200 equivalent units. So if you prohibited these units, you'd have 200 more units in your long-term rental. So many different ways of looking at it. Really interesting, but you can't see the bottom point there, but it did say we've seen 40% growth over the past year. And this is something, I think we're at the staff level, we talked a lot about this. We're very comfortable with the number of short-term rentals we currently have in Penticton, but we're concerned about the growth rate. If we see that growth rate continue year over year and we get into the, is 500 a comfortable number? Is 800 a comfortable number if we get over 1,000? So when do we start thinking about a cap in our community, or to really want to set some limits on how many we have? So is the market going to find that equilibrium and that plateau soon, or are we going to see this growth continue, and then we're going to have to intervene? So something we're really concerned about. The study looked at geographic distribution. One of the benefits of short-term rentals is you can have housing in areas that tourists want to be, like agricultural areas where we don't have any hotels, and we brand ourselves for that wine tourism and getting people into those agricultural areas, getting people into those areas close to the beaches. We're also seeing a lot in traditional residential areas, which is something that was discussed a lot. So just understanding where you're seeing these in that geographic format is really helpful. Shifting now to some of the impacts. So I'm going to start with the impacts on our traditional tourism accommodations. And I'm sharing really high level the report. This is the meat and potatoes of it. Really goes into detail on this stuff. But from a high level, short-term rentals are creating competition with hotels and motels. Obviously, it's more pronounced in the winter months when everybody is hurting a little bit more and vacancy rates at the hotels are really low. And any competition is going to hurt the viability of those businesses. So that's the number one negative, I'd say. Unlevel playing field so that Airbnbs can turn on and off and do short-term and long-term rentals. And so just having they pay residential tax versus commercial tax. So just acknowledging that unlevel playing field, that advantage that the short-term rentals might have. And the next point, the staffing challenges. This came up a lot in our stakeholder discussions and our surveys with accommodation businesses. Actually, all the businesses we talked to, and I think they look at short-term rentals as having that negative impact on housing. They can't find staff. They think, and some truth to it, that we're losing some rental housing because of short-term rentals, and that's impacting staffing. So that's a real concern that was brought up. On the benefit side, I talked about it before, it gives more diversity in our tourist offerings. We're bringing people here that wouldn't come to the community to stay in a hotel or motel. That's just a fact. We're diversifying our tourist economy. We're increasing the supply overall, particularly in the summer months. So short-term rentals add about 13% to our tourist offerings in the community overall, and over 18% in the summer. So when we want to see more people in the community, the short-term rentals give us almost 20% more units in that busy tourist seasons. And short-term rental stayers account for 25% of tourism spending. So not an insignificant amount of impact to the economy. Shifting now to impacts on housing, there's no doubt this study shows, sorry, just going back for a second. Yeah, no doubt the study showed that there is an impact on housing availability. We already have a very tight housing market, and you take 200 or 300 or 400 units out of that tight housing market, it's going to get even tighter. And when you have a tight housing market, rents go up. Short-term rentals are contributing to that. With regard to home ownership, again, it's mixed because some people are using this as the mortgage helper, so it allows them potentially to get into home ownership. But on the flip side, it's also driving prices up, which makes it harder to get into home ownership. The study does make the point, though, that if we increase our housing supply, particularly our rental supply, it's going to mitigate or potentially eliminate these negative impacts to our housing. But again, if we build more, are we just going to see more short-term rentals? Do we need to get into that point where we need to set a cap as a community? Yeah, definitely need to keep an eye on and keep monitoring the impacts on our housing. One of the results of the study was, and I'd say the nuisances that were feared when this started out were more notional than real. I think a lot of people, they think in their mind, I don't want a vacation rental in my neighborhood. It's going to be a big hassle and a party house. But when you ask people, have you ever had negative experiences? The numbers go way down. I think when people have vacation rentals in their neighborhood, they realize that they're very well kept. If you get a bad renter, they're gone at the end of the weekend, compared to a long-term rental that may not be as well kept, and they're there much longer term. So there's positives and negatives with having those short-term rentals in those neighborhoods. We do find, though, once people are licensed, they're in the program, it's 2 people per bedroom, maximum of 6. When people follow the rules, we generally don't get any complaints of nuisances. It's the ones that are unlicensed that they list them on the sites for, have 12 people in my house, and those are the ones that we get complaints on regarding parking, regarding noise and nuisance, and just too busy. Then I make the point, I talked about that before, the money that we get for the OAP, and we're also seeing short-term rentals as a catalyst for renovations and people putting in new suites. You get people that want to try it out. They do the reno to their suite, or they put in the carriage house to do short-term rental. Those are long-term dwelling units that we have in our community that we may not have had previously. We're going to skip over this. This is just showing some of the impact in Penticton compared to some other communities, just showing that the impact isn't as pronounced. I know I'm probably running a bit over time. We did I'm not going to speak much about this. We did a whole engagement and consultation section. We did surveys. We surveyed both the general public as well as operators to get information from them. We did a number of stakeholder interviews, and that really led to a lot of the findings. There's a whole section on this engagement work that was done in the report when we share that around. I will say on the engagement and consultation, though, that all sides agree that more enforcement is necessary. We need to create that level playing field. We need to really crack down on those unlicensed ones, those 40% that are unlicensed. That was the big consensus that came out of that. So just finishing up on the study, really valuable study. It shows the complicated nature of this issue. Unfortunately, you spend 30 grand on a study and you get no definitive conclusions on whether it's more impactful or more beneficial. It's kind of annoying, but at the same time, I think it does highlight the real challenging nature of this problem. Does talk about the impacts on our housing, but it does mention that, look, we need to build more, and most of these problems are going to go away. So let's find ways to build more housing, and I think that's what our focus has been. And I know our council has set more housing as a strategic priority and something that we're working really hard on. And then the consultation engagement really showed consensus around enforcement. With regard to financial impact, so I mentioned the cost of the study, another $5,000 piece to this is going to be an enforcement audit to help us close that gap between licensed and unlicensed. We really want this program to pay for itself, so we have increased fees. We're, again, monitoring how much we're spending on the enforcement and spending on our licensed clerk to manage this program. Yeah, I talked about the OAP monies that we're getting. And then just a few other considerations that may be interesting that weren't included in the study. I talked about the trends provincially and globally around this. I mean, Penticton is a tourism leader. For us to stay a leader, we need to stay on top of these trends and make sure that we have that diversity in our tourism stock. The province has acknowledged the issue, and I'm really happy with the way the province has approached this. Some of you were at the housing summit. Most of you that were there probably sat in on the section on short-term rentals, and they didn't take an approach that they were going to ban these in the province. They said, look, each municipality, we have resort municipalities, tourism is really important to the province. Let's find ways to give municipalities and regional districts. I think there's a strong acknowledgement that regional districts are really struggling with short-term rentals, not being able to have business license powers. I think that's been our best tool for managing these, and I couldn't imagine trying to deal with it without business license powers. But that's what most of you guys are dealing with. So the province did acknowledge that, and hopefully they're going to come to the table with getting the Airbnbs and Flipkey and VRBO on board, as well as hopefully doing things like they did in Quebec. The other 2 points, just wanted to say that diversity is a good thing, vibrancy is a good thing in neighborhoods. Short-term rentals are going to provide that in neighborhoods where they exist. And we are seeing higher rents caused by short-term rentals, but higher rents also do drive up rental construction, and we are going through a rental construction boom right now locally. Next steps, so council, after seeing a very similar presentation, did support an approach where we're going to continue on with the program in its permissive manner, but also going to change the classification system for 2024. Also do more on the enforcement. We're really encouraged to see what the province comes up with, hopefully by the end of this year, and hopefully giving us more tools to deal with this and mitigate any negative impacts. And we're going to continue to keep a pulse on this and ensure that short-term rentals aren't having a negative impact on our community. And probably a bit over time, but can open up for questions at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Laven. Are there any
Jim from
questions?
Osoyoos. How do you do your enforcement as far as concerned when you got a lot of absentee owners? How do you do enforcement?
Yeah, really good question. So currently, the way that we do enforcement is mostly on a complaint base. Sorry, I shouldn't say mostly on complaint basis. We have anytime we get a complaint, that's the highest level of enforcement, and that's the highest priority. So we would have our license inspector approach somebody and say, hey, you're operating an unlicensed business. You have X amount of days to come in to get a license. Or we're gonna fine you. If it's we also subscribe to a third party online program that scours the Airbnb sites, the VRBO sites, and they have a copy of our business license database. So they find out the addresses, and then if anybody's listing, they compare the business license database to the listings that are on the sites. And they give us that list, and letters get sent out saying, hey, we realize you've been advertising vacation rental. We know you don't have a business license. Please come in and talk to us on it. With regard to if there's a licensed business and they have more units or they're not adhering to the rules, then we do fine them if that's the case. But yeah, it's to date, it's been a softer approach, I think, and we are looking at, I think, now that we're 10 years into the program, I think it's people in the community know that you need a license. They know that what the rules are. So with the direction from council, we are going to be ramping up our enforcement and not taking such a soft approach on it.
Thank you. Would the board direct their questions through the chair in a proper manner, please? Thank you. Director Fredigo.
Thank you to the chair. Has there been conversation about having somebody living on site? So having someone that lives there full time?
Sir.
Yeah, good question. And through the chair to the director, that was, and I didn't talk about it today, but the study does outline different approaches from different communities. And one of the approaches is having some type of on-site requirement. I think in some communities that does work. I think it really depends on what you're trying to achieve by having that on-site person. As we've done our study, I mean, I think that's great for minimizing nuisances, but nuisances aren't really the problem in Penticton. We don't get a lot of complaints about short-term rentals from neighboring people in Penticton. So having that on-site person really is just to control the renters. And I think when you look at people that are wanting to come to our community and rent a short-term rental, they want it for the privacy. They want to have that whole property for themselves. Over half of our short-term rentals are whole houses that are rented out, and people they want to come here, whether for whatever event they're here for, whatever vacation they're trying to do, they want the privacy of that whole house. That's why they're there. So if you have somebody on site that's watching them, it's going to detract from that what they're trying to get. So I think you have to look at if you're trying to reduce the numbers of short-term rentals in your community, an on-site operator is not necessarily the best way to do that. If you're trying to minimize nuisances, on-site operator is great, but we're not really having problems with nuisances. So the other thing with the on-site operators is you're not necessarily going to reduce the number of short-term rentals you have. You're just going to reduce the quality of them, and you're going to push them into carriage houses and secondary suites, which are areas that we want to see our affordable housing in. So we did look at it, but yeah, it didn't go in that direction.
Thank you. Director Holmes, please.
Yes, thank you. I'm just wondering, in your survey, did you were you able to determine how many of the short-term rentals are being run as purely as businesses, as opposed to somebody's second home or mortgage helpers and that sort of thing? And if so, of those short-term rentals that are purely business operations, why would they not pay business taxes, and why would they not be required to rezone their properties for commercial uses?
Thank you. Mr. Laven, please.
Thank you. Through the chair, really good question. The study does have some of the numbers, and I don't have them on the top of my head, but I want to say it was 25% were that operators had more than one unit, so they would be that more professional. We did see a really big diversity in the reasons why people run vacation rentals. Some of them are that professional, that's their job. They have 3 or 4 different vacation rentals, and that's their main income, and they operate these. And we also saw a lot of people that were retirees that had a suite on their property, or they wanted to create this, and it was an income helper for them or something for them to do as a retirement project. So lots of different reasons why people operate these. With regard to taxing them, BC assessment sets the tax classifications. So with regard to zoning, I'm not sure if we would want to rezone these properties to commercial properties or have them go through that whole process. One of the benefits of the short-term rentals are, or one of the trends that we see is people will try this out for a few years, and then they realize that they're actually a lot of work, and they want to just put their unit back in long-term renting. I think if you make people go through the process of rezoning the property and reclassifying their tax, you're creating these permanent Airbnbs that are going to be this commercial unit forever. Whereas a lot of times we're seeing people turn them on they do it for a few seasons, and that unit goes back into the long-term rental. You see a different one pop up somewhere else. They try it on their area. So one of the benefits of these types of businesses are, much like home-based businesses, they provide flexibility. We have over 600 home-based businesses operating in Penticton, which are commercial uses that are happening in people's homes in residential areas of the community, with very little impact on neighborhood character and feeling. And I think we look at short-term rentals in a similar manner. We wouldn't want to have, if you're running a little accounting shop or you're cutting hair out of your kitchen, we wouldn't necessarily want to make these people rezone to commercial and go through all that and turn that into a commercial business. I think the intent is maybe you run your business there for a bit, and then maybe you if you're successful, you go into a downtown shop if you want to expand. If you're not successful, you just stop, and then it goes back into a residential setting.
Thank you, sir. Director Coyne Jr., please.
I think you meant junior, but. So when you were coming up with your tax for it and all that, how did you come up with the number? Because what would you say it was $200 or whatever? Where does that number come from? Do you have a formula, or did you just pull it out of the air?
Sure, and to answer the director through the chair, so the $200 destination marketing tax, that was established, and I can't tell you exactly why 200 was picked, but that was established when we were setting up the program, and Travel Penticton was concerned that hotel and motels paid 3% MRDT on every stay. Vacation rentals didn't pay anything, so that $200 yearly tax was meant to offset that amount. I wasn't there for the discussions on why 200 was picked, but we don't charge that anymore. Now that the province collects the 3% on vacation rentals, we don't charge that $200 tax anymore. So the way it works now is it's very similar to the way the MRDT is collected. When Airbnb lists a site and somebody books through them, there's a tax that's added on there. Airbnb collects it. They remit that back to the province monthly, and then the province remits that back to the local government on I think it's a quarterly basis. We get those funds.
Thank you. Director Miller, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you for acknowledging me. I would like to go through the chair and ask both Mayor Holmes and Mayor Johansson. It's my understanding that both Summerland and Oliver adopted the bylaw that Airbnbs would be permitted for primary residents only, and that secondary residents would be disqualified. And so I guess I'll start with Mayor Holmes. What was Summerland's rationale behind that, and how is it working now that it's been in for a year or two?
Thank you. Director Holmes, please.
I think I would need a length of time we've just had with Penticton to be able to explain it all to you. It was subject to lots of council discussion and debate and back and forth and public consultation. And it's what we came up with. We had a number of concerns with the Penticton model, and it seems to be going well. We'll review it after this tourist season, so after a year.
Thank you. Director Johansson, do you have a comment?
Not much more than Director Holmes said. We put it in, it's probably had the effect to limit the amount of VRBOs, Airbnbs that we have in our community, and it probably has limited the amount of complaints that we have. I can't even remember the last complaint we've had about a tenant staying there or people coming and staying in a VRBO Airbnb and neighbors getting upset with parking and noise and stuff like that. So I guess it's had the desired impact that we were looking for.
Thank you, directors. Director Taylor, please.
Yeah, a couple of quick comments. One, the comment about complaints. Like, it seems to me if we had on a number of 500 short-term rentals, if you had a dozen complaints, that's actually a fairly high number if you extrapolate that for any other practice. That's, you know, if it was seatbelts and we applied that same ratio, you know. Second, concerned, or I'm just curious, like, what's the impact on demand for sewer and water? Because if you've got a building that's got 3 bedrooms in it, and now you've got 6 people in it, and in my observation, usually it is 6 people. In the past, you would have seen, you know, husband, wife, 2 kids. So that's 4. Now you're looking at 6. That's a 50% increase. Is that a concern? And third, rent. You know, and you and I have had this discussion on the side, but the market rate was just under $1,100, and they cited that in this study back in 2020. It's just under $1,600 now for the same 1 bedroom. So, you know, I'm not sure the degree to which STRs are impacting this, but the concern that we've got about impact on housing and rents is really going up fast. So those are my 2 comments and a concern. Question.
Thank you. Mr. Laven, please.
Yeah, through the chair, with regard to the services, that was not within the scope of the study, and it hasn't really been a concern. I know we do charge based on usage for water and stormwater, but yeah, it hasn't been brought to our attention as a concern from our infrastructure team. So I don't have much to comment on that. With regard to the rental rates, I mean, it's again very complicated issue because there's a number of different trends going on right now. Massive housing demand in the province and locally. So, you know, what's causing the rent increases? Is it the demand for housing, or is it the removing long-term rentals for short-term rentals? Probably both having an impact, and this study does try to determine you know, what impact short-term rentals have. The one slide I did skip over, 12% increase, or 12% of all rent is attributed to short-term rentals, the presence of short-term rentals. But the slide also showed that Penticton is having a much less impact in Penticton than other communities. So whether that's for other reason, or maybe it's because we have a more permissive program, it's debatable to say. But yeah, I think in Penticton in particular, you're also seeing a lot of new rental constructed in the past couple of years. So that's also driving rents up. New product is always at a higher rate than older product. So lot of different variables with rental, and that's what the study was really trying to look at. Well, how much of the impact is being caused by short-term rentals? And I think the study did say, look, if you have a more healthy vacancy rate, that 3 to 5% that's recommended, a lot of these problems are going to be mitigated or altogether eliminated.
Thank you, sir. Director Gettens, please.
Thanks to the chair. Thanks for the presentation. It was really interesting, and I'm looking forward to reading the study. Just a quick comment and then a question. I think that if anywhere looks at increasing housing in a tourist area without capping short-term rentals, I think you are just creating more product for those professional short-term rental businesses to buy more. Once you've already owned 3 or 4 short-term rentals, it's much easier to leverage those properties and keep on buying more product to sell. So my question is, at the beginning of the slideshow, I think you had said something about there's been 255 hotel rooms lost. Does that account for the new builds, like the new hotels that have come up? Like, is that taken into account? And then my second question is the $200,000 to go towards affordable housing. How is that money? What's happening there? I guess I'm just curious about what's $200,000 doesn't seem like a lot of money to me to address affordable housing. So I'm just curious about what the city is planning on doing with that money. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Gettens. Mr. Laven, please.
Great, thank you through the chair to the director. With regard to the loss of motel and hotel units, so the slide I did share accounted for the loss of units as well as the construction of new units, and the net loss is about 200, and that's not including campsites that have been lost. And I think that story's been told before, but hundreds of campsites that we used to have where we welcomed people to Penticton are no longer in our community. Still lots regionally, but yeah, within the city of Penticton boundaries, we've certainly seen the loss. And we're also seeing a lot of motels that used to do short-term rentals or traditional accommodations. They're turning into long-term rentals when they get a little long in the tooth and they've been there for 50 years and not kept up, and they start doing long-term rentals, and then they just turn into basically apartment units. So we're seeing that trend occur as well. The other question you had, which escapes me now, was
Sorry, I'll follow up. Yeah, thanks. So you had mentioned the $200,000 that's being collected to help address affordable housing. I was just curious about what that money is going to be used for.
Mr. Laven.
Great. Yeah, through the chair again. So just like the MRDT, and I don't know how familiar the committee is with the MRDT, but for us to opt into that program and have the province collect that money on our behalf, we do need to submit a plan and report on that plan regularly. So every year you have to show how you're going to spend that money on destination marketing. Very similar with the affordable housing, we have to show what we're going to do with that money. The plan that we have, because we've just shifted to the affordable housing, it's geared towards hospitality industry housing. So some of that money will go to planning work. Some of it will be collected in our affordable housing reserve with the intent of creating a project and partnering with somebody on a project. Yeah, $200,000 isn't going to do much for us, but a few years down the road, it's a good amount of money to purchase land and then perhaps partner with an agency to create a housing product that we can use. I know there's been talk about other communities having, like your Whistlers or Jaspers or other resort communities that have not-for-profits that deal with workforce housing specifically geared towards tourism. These are discussions that we're having, but no firm decisions on yet.
Thank you. Director Gettens, you have a follow-up before I go to Director Gilbert?
Yeah, thank you. Just really quickly, in the study, was there any stakeholder engagement with industries outside of tourism, like industrial sector or even like healthcare? I know healthcare is an industry that I work in, and just the pricing of housing is a deterrent, and those are pretty good paying jobs. So are there any feedback from industries out there? Because no doubt our short-term rentals help the tourism industry. I completely agree with that. But I think that there's an agreement that it does impact the housing availability, and that might impact other industries. So I'm just curious, have you heard from those voices in the study? Thank you.
Mr. Laven, please.
Yeah, through the chair to the director, really good question, and we did reach out to a lot of different groups. The college, interior, we talked to interior health, we talked to a number of different industries, and everybody we talked to acknowledged the fact that they're having a really hard time attracting and retaining staff based on housing costs. And almost everybody we talked to, I don't want to use the word like blamed, but attributed some of the concerns to short-term rental. So we were approaching them to talk about short-term rental, and almost everybody brought that up. That look, short-term rentals are making housing more expensive, and we're having a hard time attracting staff because our housing's so expensive. So there was a lot of linkage there. But there was also an acknowledgement that short-term rentals were good for recruitment, for people coming to the community and renting a short-term rental for a short amount of time until they found a long-term housing option. There was also at the college level, obviously we have a fairly large college campus with 0 student housing. So on both sides, there was an acknowledgement that, yeah, a lot of students would rent out housing in the short-term rentals. People would do them in the summer and then rent them to students in the winter. But it was also acknowledged that a lot of short-term rental operators now are pushing into through September, so they're not even making them available till October. So you're getting students that come in and they're couch surfing or commuting really long distances until October when those short-term rentals go to long-term. So we did have those discussions, and when we do share the study out, there is some data on that as well.
Thank you, sir. Director Gilbert, please.
Thank you through the chair. I just want to say, just make some comments here in regards to this, because I think it's a big thing that we see in our community, and I was skeptical of these short-term rentals inside Penticton and what an effect it has. But after seeing this detailed report, I was really glad that staff went ahead and did this. I think at the end of the day, I think short-term rentals have turned into becoming a scapegoat for what affordable housing is. And really, we're not talking about the deeper problem that, we see housing as an investment. It's a commodity. It is not really a right to have a house. If we didn't have short-term rentals, we'd have the same problem that Vancouver dealt with, where they had empty condos because it's used as speculation to do it. We don't have in the city of Penticton. We don't have a speculation tax on empty rentals. We don't have anything to enforce that, and the province has not made one of our communities to do it. So even if we were to say we would have no short-term rentals here in the city of Penticton, there would probably be condos that would be empty, just be used as investment. So until we as a society decide that we look at housing differently, looking at it as, do we have public or nonprofit, or do we believe that people are making too much money off of housing? And in regards to, as a renter here in town, when we look at rentals here that I've been watching for quite a bit, I don't know how long this study went for. I believe that there is some effect that short-term rentals have, but at the end of the day, what it really comes down to is the market. The place I lived in is it's a 2-bedroom, it's $16.75, and the reason why it's that price is because Skaha Shores was built down the road, and that's what the price of a 2-bedroom was at that time. The reason why 1-bedroom is $1,600 to $1,700 is because the new building that just went up down on off of Skaha Lake Road is now marketing $1,700 for a 1-bedroom. So is short-term rentals really having the problem? It's not. We don't, as a municipality, can enforce rent control. This province has been a court challenge by the city of Vancouver. It'd have to be the province that could come in and be able to regulate how rentals are shifted from prices when someone leaves a rental. Because when someone leaves a rental, the person can increase that rent to any price that they want. They don't have to follow the 2 or 3%. Municipalities don't have the power to put rent controls in. So I think, when we look at this, I was quite skeptical of the short-term rentals before coming into council, but after seeing this report and the work that the city has done, I don't believe it has the effect that I think people have. I think the effect is really a cultural and society one of, how do we view housing? Do we view it as an investment, or do we see it as a human right to be housed in it? And there's many policies that we can put in to be able to regulate that, and also building, different types of housing like cooperative and nonprofits inside our community.
Thank you, Director Gilbert. Keeping in mind that our time is running short here, Director Taylor, please.
Yeah, echo, I do think it's a really good report, good collection of facts, really informs the discussion. you said a lot of people are doing what I would call double ending. They rent it out during the winter, then they do short-term rentals, then they rent it out during the winter. How do they do that? It's against the law.
Mr. Laban, please.
Yeah, through the chair, I think you're correct. We can't do fixed term leases anymore with changes to the Residential Tenancy Act. So I think when people are doing that, they're really careful with who they're renting to. So if you're renting to a student that lives in Salmon Arm that's in Penticton for a course, it's easy to rent it out during that school semester. You know they're going to leave at the end of the semester. They don't have to. You can't force them out. But I think, yeah, we haven't really heard, and I'm surprised we haven't heard more. I don't want to call them squatters, but people that just say, "Hey, look, I've been here for 2 months. I know you want me out because you got some short-term rentals, but I got nowhere to go." So, but it's yeah, it's a good point.
Thank you, sir. I see no other questions. I want to thank you for a very thorough report.
Director Watt had his hand up, Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry, sir. Director Watt, sorry, sir.
Thank you to the chair. Don't be sorry. I'm not sure you can see everybody. And at the end of the day, I've obviously been a part of this conversation for a long time, and it's something I won't say passionate about, but have a keen interest in. And having been through the housing summit in Vancouver, Silga, and speaking with peers in different communities, this survey, I think that the one common theme I've noticed to this point is that all you can really take away is that every municipality, every area is unique. Their needs, their wants, their desires are unique to every other. So we're going to have to find a way to really make ourselves the way our community wants to be. And I know that that's going to be really tough, but at the end of the day, Airbnb is simply an evolution. It's the way people want to travel more and more. And I'm talking about families. If you were to ask our hoteliers if their kitchenette rooms are full, the answer is going to be yes. Are there other rooms full? Not necessarily. People want to travel. They want to have privacy. They want to have an area. And if tourism is getting a 25% hit on this on non-recycled money, that is a big hit for Penticton. That's significant dollars. The fact that I'm potentially saying that we overlook every now and then the construction industry, which in BC is 2 times larger than tourism and 6 times larger than agriculture, to consider not allowing the building of homes because it's going to be rented out, I think is short-sighted. And I certainly believe that with all the respect to the communities that are making this owner-occupied only or eliminating it, you're not going to see rents drastically decline, and you're not going to solve your housing problem. And what I'm saying is, I truly believe personally that this is an overlapping but separate issues. They're definitely connected, don't get me wrong on that, but they need to be addressed separately, and the housing shortage needs to be addressed aggressively through other means, not just eliminating what is potentially helping your community.
Thank you, Director Watts. Director Holmes, can you hold for a second? CEO, do we have the ability to carry on into the protective services or stand aside these other 2 issues?
You'd have to ask your members, Mr. Chair, whether they wanted to continue on and just defer the protective services meeting, or whether they want to adjourn and go into protective services. That'd be up to them.
Thank you. Members, we looking for a motion to carry on?
Director Knodel, can I make a suggestion that maybe we finish with this delegation and then just recess the meeting and take it up after the board meeting to continue this? And then we just aren't caught in a time loop here or time crunch that we seem to be under. So.
Thank you, sir. Definitely acceptable. Director Holmes then.
Yeah, thank you. Just one final comment. I think my concern is when short-term rentals becomes a business where it's difficult, but I think we need to be really cautious about those real business operations, because they're basically undermining local government authority. They're undermining our zoning, and when we lose control of our zoning, we've basically lost control of our entire purpose of being. So I think that's my concern with the way short-term rentals are going, becoming business operations.
Thank you, Director Holmes. Any other questions for our delegate here? Seeing none, I'd like to thank you very much, Mr. Laban. A very well done, very thorough presentation. You're looking for a motion to recess and come back later. Director Bush, Director Gettins, all in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, I will adjourn out to the chair. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Director Knodel. We'll go straight into the Protective Services Committee meeting, and I'll go to Director Roberts for that one. Go ahead, please.
Oh, thank you. Starting the Protective Services at 10:01. Could I have a motion to accept the agenda? I see Director Knodel and Director Graham all in favor. Cute. All right, so next up on the agenda, I'm going to pass this on to the CAO.
CAO has left the room as
Okay,
the
so then I
conflict
believe
part, so we'll
from
just,
discussions prior, it will be, if I could please have Mr. Woods speak to the group.
Great, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I was asked to come in and just introduce this. So just refreshing everybody's memory, back during strategic planning and budget process in 21, there was interest in doing a review of the emergency program. So that process was added to the 22 budget. Award process occurred, and the consultant Sundog Solutions has worked through the process and completed that, now bringing it in for April 30 of this year. So a lot of really good information brought in, a very complex report. So the staff are looking for some direction how you want to commence with this. I do have a quick run through of high-level recommendations if you're interested, Chair. For the most part, the recommendations focus primarily on capacity planning and business continuity. A lot of good information, as I say, that likely will be budget-based, but also some good processes that are occurring already. The Emergency Program Act, which is a fairly significant piece of legislation related to what we do, we know that's coming forward and will have some impact on what we do and how we do it. But this study did a good job of pointing out some of the gaps that we already have that we need to address that would be even beyond that. So those are some of the focus areas that we have now within our program. Came to us in the middle of the year, but some good ideas and good solutions for what we need to work towards. Primarily within the area of planning. We have a 2010 emergency response plan, which is still effective and works quite well. But some of the good information that came to us in this process was to have a deeper dive into the communities and what we'd see as sort of neighborhood emergency preparedness plans. So that work is commenced. We've got an update process occurring now for our plan. And then a little more specifically within the area of response, we've got a limitation there with our current legislation, as we know, within the world of mitigation. So much discussion that needs to happen there, but some good solutions that were provided to us to sort of look at, as we heard, as boots on the ground and working with the communities. I see Chief Finelli behind me here. We've had some good dialogue through this process with the chiefs and how they might get more involved, as well as some of the communities. But then in the world of planning, that's one area that we do a lot of focus on, preparedness, a lot of training work there. We've got some good feedback that's come in that we want to see board level training. So I can tell you that July 27th, we've got some training coming for the board. And other than that, I think I'm going to leave it to you, Chair, unless there's any questions or where you want to take this.
Well, thank you, Mr. Woods. Well, I think we're going to open up for questions. It's quite a large document, and just receiving it as quickly as we did, I'm assuming that many of us would like to delve into it a little deeper. I see Director Coyne Jr., and just let me start writing a list. I see a group of others. So if I have Director Coyne Jr. first, and then I see Director Coyne Sr., Knodel.
Okay, I'll start.
Thanks.
Mr. Woods, I'd like to know why you're presenting this and not the contractor themselves.
We asked for the contractor to make a presentation, and they were unavailable, as I understand it. We can certainly ask them to come back at a later date, but I think they moved on to a new project, and at this point, they weren't able to come in.
So would that not have been part of the original contract that they present to us?
No, just the report itself was part of the contract.
Interesting. Okay, I'll leave it.
Okay. Boy, sorry, the T. Director Coyne Senior, please.
Yeah, one of the, I think they did a very in-depth job, and I was really happy that that worked out that well. One of the more striking things in this report was the 170 unactioned recommendations coming from the report, and now there's 22 recommendations have been marked as completed, which leaves approximately 150 unactioned things, recommendations. And that's over, I understand, from 2017, that those reports started coming in with the after action reviews. So my question is, how can this possibly happen that it took this long and for these recommendations to even, like, why has this happened that we've got all these issues that have been stacking up for years now that haven't been actioned on? And as we go through the report, it says that, a lot of them they can't do it because they don't have the staff. Well, if we don't have the staff, we've never been told that we don't have enough staff to do the job. At budgeting, we've never been asked for more money to do these emergency management type tasks. So how in the dickens can this possibly add up to this amount of work that's been sitting on the corner of somebody's desk? That boggles my mind.
Mr. Woods, would you be able to speak to that?
Yeah. So certainly good point on bringing that into budget. We work with the resources we have, and not, I don't know all the specific ones within that recommendation, those gaps, but often we always do an after action report. We always look at steps that need to occur or should have occurred or can happen differently. Often they are very similar in nature. We need to involve more of our partners, more of our stakeholders. That process, I would probably argue we are doing some of those things. Some specific steps related to mitigation, flood works. We've talked about that in detail, about our limitations on legislation. But in the end, there's much work to be done. We have had compounding events occurring, and having been involved in this program since 2003, the amount of large-scale events that happen in our backyard is happening far more often. They're far more egregious, as we've heard in this room before. They take far more time. We saw in this report here the number of days that has taken all staff, not just the primary emergency staff away, but all staff. So work gets backed up in all different departments as well. But those specific targeted items, that's work to be done. And we need to do that we need to do a better job of that as a staff group, to bring that back in and point out how we can do it and with the resources we need.
Any follow-up, Director Coyne?
I understand that there's a lot of work to be done. Obviously, we've got 150 outstanding items as of the writing of this report. My point is that over the years, I know I've been the one that's been belly aching and complaining about things that issues haven't been resolved, that from my first incident in 2017 with emergency management. And out of those after action reviews, nobody's ever come to the board and said, we need more help. We get quarterly reports. Nobody ever says in those quarterly reports, well, guys, we're up to, 170 items. We've got 22 picked off. we need to deal with the rest of them. So we all sit here as a board and think that things are being done. Well, they are being done, but a little bit here and a little bit there. But obviously, it's not obviously, but it seems as if we're picking out the ones that are maybe easy fixes or ones that we know how to deal with. But it just comes down to the fact that we've got 150 unresolved issues that we need to deal with that have been accumulating. And I don't think that that's good enough that we're just going to work on it. We should have known that this was happening, and we should have a plan. I'm just blown away that we didn't get requests for more staff to do these things. I mean, nobody likes to pay more money, but when we think we're getting something and we're not getting it, then why are we even doing these things? So I don't know. That's all I got to say.
Thank you. I'll take that more as a statement and a follow-up from what you were stating. Next is Director Knoll.
Thank you. And Director Coyne stole some of my thunder here, so I'm going to redirect a little. There were a couple of things in this study that, raised an eyebrow. We're doing quite a bit towards mitigation and prevention with fire smarting, but when it comes to flooding, it's nigh on impossible with the track we've taken unless we get legislation out of the way, especially in the small creeks and streams. When owners of property come up against the legislation, they're absolutely stymied. To put sandbags across large tracts of land, there isn't the labor nor the time available. And if the event doesn't happen, then they're again suffering more time and labor to remove these sandbags. An example being a small piece of creek that some of you are familiar with that needed to be desilted. That particular piece of land didn't affect the landowner, so the community came forward and arranged for the excavation work. The problem being is that the permitting involved, the excavation work was $700, the permitting was $12,000 and 18 months. So basically the community explains a form of travel to me that was not acceptable. In some cases we need to just get out of people's way and let them take care of things. And that's one of the problems that we're running up against. And we need to start being advocate for this in the strongest voice that we possibly can be. Yeah, that's probably my biggest point being there. We have local people available to fill in and help out, and hopefully this report will bring us to the point where they're being used and they're there. We need to use them. There isn't a lot of labor out in the pool anymore, so just going out and hiring more people is going to become a bit of an issue. There are tools and equipment in most motels too that haven't been listed up for use. So just a couple of points that I see and should be open for discussion. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Knoll. Director Knoll, I see that as a statement. You didn't have any specific question for Mr. Woods, though?
No, sir. As I say, my thunder was kind of stolen there. So.
Okay. Next up is Director Monteith.
And through the chair, I'm, I guess, frustrated that the contractor is not here because I have very specific questions about feedback that we got and lack of feedback. So Apex is an example. That community was evacuated last year. I do not see any reference to resort issues, forestry actions around there, mitigation works that could be done, should be done. So I'm concerned about other feedback that might be missing. And I am asking to see a complete list of the feedback. I feel like I just, as a director, I want to know and see that feedback. So I wish the contractor was here so that we could ask that direct question and have access to that information. So I am disappointed. So I do want to share that. I also am concerned about next steps and how to bridge those recommendations with actual actions. And perhaps we need to look at breaking that down some way so that we're not next year coming out with a huge budget increase, because I also don't think ratepayers want that. They want to see us, as Director Coyne mentioned, coming up with an action plan to move forward in the right direction, because we haven't been. And I think our ratepayers are expecting us to have this service, especially when they're in need. When Voyant didn't work and the community of Apex didn't get the alert that they were being evacuated, that's a failure. Like, there's lots of opportunities here. I don't see any of that in this report. So I was really concerned, and I did hear from my community of Apex. They wanted to know why they were not included in the consultation. They weren't asked for feedback. Tulameen had a meeting, absolutely. You guys were evacuated previously as well. Headley had an experience. So I feel like as much as the consultation did occur, I feel like communities that had a recent impact should have been reached out to for sure, because they had fresh ideas. So I do ask for that information, and I have some ideas about what we could do for next steps if the board is interested in those at some point.
Thank you. So any specific question for Mr. Woods, like out of that, do you have one? No? Okay, a statement. All right, so next up is
I have one.
Pardon me?
I have a question, if I may.
I've got you on the list. This is Director Holmes, right?
My apologies.
All right, so I've got Director Coyne Jr., who's already spoke, so I'm going to move to Director Gettens and come back to Director Coyne if I can. Director Gettens?
Thank you to the chair. I thought this report was pretty good as well. And I think part of where the stumbling block is right now is not having the consultant here. I think we all had a few questions about the report. So not having that person that put the report together is really difficult. And I think it's putting Mr. Woods in the hot seat a little bit, because I know there's just a lot of work that the consultant did, with no doubt that Mr. Woods is definitely was involved. I was curious about the strengths and the weaknesses the SWOT analysis done at the end of it. And I thought there were some really great ideas in there to explore in some kind of a workshop or a discussion setting, you know, around the communication, around the role of the volunteer fire chiefs, around the role of the staff in the emergency service plan. And I read through the report as well that, you know, citizens, like everybody, doesn't, you know, nobody wants to pay more taxes, but obviously that this is a priority. But maybe it's a greater priority than something else we're providing that needs to take a for a little bit. So I feel like we need to have a more robust conversation before budget comes. And what are the steps that are a priority? I really do look to Director Coyne's, both of them, Director Monteith, where your communities were, you know, recently involved in this. And the other directors too. I know I'm not naming everybody, but there is a conversation that we need to have here, but we need to have everybody in the room at the same time, including communications, the fire chiefs, the consultant, because there's ways to get moving forward on things like this. But right now we're having just a bit of an abbreviated conversation because not everybody's in the room. So I really am just putting the request there, Chair. I don't know the proper way of doing this, but I want this conversation to come back with the consultant. And if that's an extra cost that we need to bear, let's do it. We're in this to get this going. So let's bring this forward with that person.
Oh, thank you, Director Gettens. And it sounds like that is a question that a lot of people were. I see you, Director Taylor. You're after Director Holmes. Director Holmes.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, again, this question might be better for the consultant, but I'll ask it anyway. So one of the recommendations is to provide a dedicated support person to the volunteer fire chiefs. And it says it could be a support staff member, or it could be a regional fire chief. To me, those are two big, hugely different kind of positions. And so my question would be, well, what's better for emergency management, to have a regional fire chief, or just somebody on staff supporting the chiefs? And how do we look at the whole role of the fire departments in emergency management? I have my own perspective, but that's from a municipal point of view. So I'm not sure if that would work regionally or not, but you know, what is it that's being recommended here for the fire chiefs, for the fire departments.
Thank you, Director Holmes. Mr. Woods, do you have any enlightenment or understanding in yourself in regards to the differential between a couple of those roles?
Just a few points, Chair. So just to be clear, staff were not involved in this process. The consultant was asked to do this. We provided some logistical assistance, but we weren't involved in the process. So we're just really digesting the report ourselves internally now. Specific to fire chiefs, you know, the answer is having the fire chiefs involved within the emergency program is incredibly important. We know that during major fire events, that's challenging to do, but they have expertise in not only their community, but the incident command model. And I think most of them are quite familiar with how that model works with an EOC. So having them involved and engaged in an EOC, perhaps in a landslide event or a flood event, if they have an appetite for that, that would be great. And we need to do a better job of working with them for that. And that'll come about likely in training and exercises and planning. And to the regional chief, I couldn't speak to that, Chair. That would have to be, I think, deferred to the CAO for further discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Woods. Next up, Director Taylor.
Yep. Useful report. Have some concerns. You know, I see reference to the public consultation sessions, and the one I was at had 2 or 3 people. And so, you know, I've done a while in public consultation, and that I'm not confident in the results of sessions that have 2 or 3 people. So what else about the report? I do think that the recommendations to me make sense just the same, okay? Like, I wouldn't argue with the fact that we need more staff. The fact that we've got the least number of staff of the organizations that were looked at, maybe that's not, I mean, it's great to have low staff and get the job done, but maybe being lowest staff in this area is not something to be proud of. Yeah, we've probably all got questions for the consultant, but at the same time, and so, okay, let's get the consultant in here and if we can ask those questions, but at the same time, I think we need to get our heads around the fact that we're probably looking at 3 more staff. That, I mean, that's what it says here. 3 more or 2.5 more, and we've got 3 or 4 plans that we need to get actioned. And so somewhere we need to figure out how to move from where we are now to getting that done.
Thank you, Director Taylor. I'm assuming you don't have any specific question for Mr. Woods. Okay, perfect. I'm going to move on now to Director Coyne Jr.
Thank you. I'm willing to make a motion today because I think we need to do something. Committee Chair Roberts and I spoke last night about this issue, and I will say I'm disappointed that we don't have the consultant here to speak with. With that, though, Director Roberts, or Chair Roberts, however I'm supposed to say it right now, and I have discussed a working group, and if I may, I'll make a motion that Director Roberts and I put together a working group with term of reference to bring back to the next board or next regular scheduled meeting, and then we'll move forward on from there, because I believe that we need to really dive into this, and we cannot let this just sit on a shelf and collect dust like some of the other reports that are currently doing so. So I'll make that motion.
Is that a second from Director Gettins? Okay, Director Gettins. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Do we want anybody to speak to that motion? Director Gettins?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to thank Director Coyne and yourself, Chair, for putting that forward and coming prepared with that. I think that is exactly what we need. And I think that's what we're feeling in this room right now, is that there's time is of the essence and we want to get some action going. And we have a role as a policymaker here to help support that. So thanks for bringing that forward, and yeah, good work.
Director Rodrigo.
Thank you, through the chair. I had a question for Mark. Some of the recommendations in there with the ESS volunteers talked about retention, retaining, supporting building capacity. So how is our volunteer coordinator supporting that recommendation?
Okay, so we're gonna finish up with this motion, and then can I then get Mr. Woods to speak to that, Director Fedrigo? Okay, perfect. Any more statements on the motion that's on the table at the moment? Yell at me, Director Cano.
Director Miller has his hand up.
That motion also contain bringing the contractor back in to explain the to do the presentation, or should we do that as a separate motion?
I think that should probably be a separate motion.
Thank you.
Director Miller?
I apologize. I had to leave the room. Director Coyne Jr., could you repeat your motion, please?
That we create a working group, and the director, the chair and I will create a working group, and we'll bring it back to the next regular scheduled meeting to have it all approved.
Director Gettens.
Thank you. Just a quick question, Chair. Is the working group on the board of directors, or does the working group include staff? Or I'm just curious who's on the working group.
So when Director Roberts and I spoke about this last night, there'll be some directors. We don't want to overload it. We also want to bring in people like fire chiefs and whatnot to give us technical support on some of the things that are there. We would also want to speak to some of the staff that are key on this. Because we're looking at policy, we don't necessarily want staff to be the ones making the decisions or the recommendations that come back to this committee. Because it's not that the working group will be making decisions, they'll be making recommendations back to this committee to take to the board. It won't be their job to make decisions at all. It'll be, here's our recommendation based on this need, and it'll be based on information, not based on, feelings.
And then just thanks for that. That makes good sense to me. Just as a quick follow-up, so then would there be an element of support required from a staff person, like an admin support required for the working group?
Maybe we'll work that out as we work out the terms for the working group. We'll have to talk to Mr. Safino to see if there's funding for that as well.
Okay, well, thank you. I think right now, can we see all those in favor of the motion that is on the table? All right, any opposed? Director Bush, am I missing anybody else? All right, so the motion passes. Now if we can carry back on in regards to Woods, I have Director Fedrigo that was first up. Their question to Mr. Woods.
Yep, thank you to the chair. So I was just inquiring with one of the recommendations for retention, retaining, supporting, and building capacity with the ESS volunteers, how our volunteer coordinator would be supporting that recommendation.
Mr. Woods?
Yeah, thank you. So the volunteer coordinator is formulating our process for onboarding of volunteers. So that structure would be used. Going through a recruitment process would be more specific to neighborhoods that are in the process of finding ESS volunteers. And that happens through our emergency program coordinator for the most part, and the actual ESS folks themselves. So Naramata coordinator was in yesterday, and I think he was just mentioning there's a new member. So it typically happens community by community, but the volunteer coordinator is looking at a broader, more corporate perspective on that to some degree, yeah.
All right, thank you. I see Director Knodel again.
I will make the motion to bring the contractor back in to facilitate the presentation to us at the first opportunity.
Okay, do I have a seconder for that? Director Bush, all in favor? Or sorry,
What? I have a question. I have a question.
Yes.
Would that be a cost to us because it was not added to the contract?
Mr. Woods, could you speak to that, please?
Yes, it would.
All right.
So I guess my follow-up to that would be, why was that not initially part of the contract? Because now it's going to cost us even more. It was already increased once, and now you're talking about another increase to have the contract or have this report explained to us. Obviously, staff wasn't prepared to explain this to us, so I don't understand what the goal was to have a report done with no explanation to then do what? Sit on the shelf? I don't understand, Mr. Woods.
Is there a specific question, Mr. Woods, on that?
Why was it not part of the contract to have it presented to the board when we asked for for this to be done?
All right. Mr. Woods?
Staff advertised the terms of reference that was provided to us that was developed by the board. That's what we put out.
All right. Director Bush, is this a question in regards to the motion? Okay, Director Bush?
Yeah, I'm concerned, well, for both motions, what service is paying for this?
Sorry, Mr. Woods, in regards to this type of funding, would you have any answers in regards to where we would be taking that from?
So far, the costs have been within the Regional Emergency Management Program, so that would probably be the likely spot to put it. All
right, thank you. And again, I believe Director Coyne Jr. had stated that it needs to be some discussion with Mr. Savino. Any other questions on the last motion in regards to having the contractor coming to go over their report with the board?
Director Miller's
Right.
waving at you.
All right, thank you. Director Miller.
Yes, Mr. Woods, I certainly don't have the year's experience as Director Coyne does, but from my experience, every time that there was any kind of consultant's report or whatever the issue was, that the consultant was available quite often virtually for a half an hour. And is that not standard practice? If you order soup in a restaurant, you do get a bag of crackers and you're not charged extra for it. But would that not be the working model of any consultant? Because I can never recall, as I said, in my relatively short time, having a paid consultant and then them not presenting, as I said, usually by Zoom, which is fine. Afterward, is that not part of what you're paying for?
Mr. Woods?
Yeah, that would be typical. That was not part of this particular terms of reference.
And can I ask my fellow directors, can you think of either municipally or on this board of a major consultant's report where we did not have follow-up afterward with the group?
Oh, thank you. I think all of us can reflect on that. I don't necessarily believe we can get into a discussion about that at the moment, but moving forward, your question, Director Miller, answered by Mr. Woods, that they stated that they believe that this particular one didn't make a reference to that. Was that a hand, Director Graham?
I've got a question, Director Roberts.
Yes.
Do we have a ballpark as to what the extra expense would be to have the contractor come back in?
Mr. Woods, would you have any from previous experiences? And again, we're running into time issues here. I'd like to get this thing because we have a board meeting.
I don't at this time, Chair, but we'll check with the consultant right away.
All right, thank you. So I'd like to now make sure that we have a vote on the motion that's on the table. All in favor in regards to having the consultant meet with the board? All opposed? One, I have Director Graham, Director Holmes, Director Coyne Senior, Director Reyes Gilbert. And Anyone else? Did I miss anybody? All right,
Director Watt.
Director Watt, can we have a count in regards to the nays versus the yays?
I have 5 opposed.
Okay, so that would mean that it passes. All right. All right, thank you, Mr. Woods. Looks like we've got some things to delve into in regards to this very significant report. I'd like to now ask for a motion for closing protective services. Director Coyne Jr. and Director Graham, all in favor? Thank you. Now let's pass it on to Chair Pendergraft.
Thank you, Director Roberts. We'll move straight into our regular Regional District Okanagan-Smilkameen Board meeting. We have the proposed agenda there. This is an opportunity for anybody who wants to remove anything off the consent agenda. Anybody have anything to remove off the consent agenda? Seeing no hands there, looking for a motion to approve the agenda. Moved, seconded, thank you. All in favor? Great. Any opposed? Motion carries. That brings us down to the consent agenda, corporate services. Looking for a motion to adopt that. Moved, seconded, thank you. All in favor? Great. Any opposed? Motion carries. Consent agenda, development services. Looking for a motion on that one to adopt. Moved, seconded, thank you. All in favor? Thank you very much. Any opposed? Motion carries. That CAO is just making it back in here in time. We are on item B1, bylaw enforcement. Untidy, unsightly bylaw enforcement. Term appointment of the Animal Control Officer, CAO.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. The community charter requires that a board designate officers as animal control officers. We have just entered into a new contract for animal control, hence a turnover of our animal control officers. So the contract was awarded to Biggs, and we are recommending that Nicole Lauritzen, Angela Henshaw, and Elizabeth Biggs be appointed as animal control officers for the regional district.
Okay. It's moved. Is there a seconder? Thank you. Any discussion on that? I think it's pretty standard. Seeing none, I'll call the question. This one is a corporate vote, so all those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. Down to item C under planning services, an Ag Land Commission referral in electoral area H, CAO.
Yeah, this is a 46 hectare parcel at the west end of Wrights Road. It's about 4.5 kilometers southwest of Princeton. And they are proposing to remove ore and overburden from their lot and then reconfigure that back into agricultural land. And we are recommending that that non-farm use application be authorized to proceed to the Agricultural Land Commission, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I'll go to Director Coyne for direction.
I'd like to make the administrative recommendation.
Okay, you're moving it, seconded, it's on the floor. Any discussion on this? Not seeing any hands. This one is again a corporate vote. All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. Down to C2, letter of concurrence, CAO.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm just encouraging my colleague, Chief Tony Ionella, to come up to the table. He is here in support of the application that we're making for a letter of concurrence for the tower that has to go up behind the Willowbrook Fire Hall for a new repeater. So this is an RDOS parcel. It's the Willowbrook Fire Department Hall, and they're proposing to put up a 30-meter tower in order to improve communications throughout electoral area C. So Chief Ionella, in addition to doing a major reconstruction of the fire hall, is also improving communications out in that area, and he's here to answer any questions that the board may have.
Okay. Is there any questions in regard to this to start? It looks like he's getting off the hook easy. So I will go to Director Knodel. Are you prepared to make that motion? Actually, don't.
I am so moved.
Okay, you're moving it, and there's a seconder. It's on the floor. Any discussion on this? Not seeing any hands again. It's a corporate vote. All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Chief Iannella. C3, Official Community Plan Folder Zone Review, CAO.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Chief Iannella wasn't expecting that, but I thought it was a good opportunity to introduce him. So this is the Falder area, and we've had lots of discussion about the Falder and the Meadow Valley watershed, and both our Falder water system and the aquifer itself. And discussions have mainly focused on the capacity of the water system out in that area, which also then feeds into Summerland. So with a Falder zone review that's been recently completed, there is a proposal to strengthen the policies within the Area F Official Community Plan. And that's what this is about, Mr. Chair. So we're proposing to amend the Area F Official Community Plan and the Okanagan Valley zoning bylaw in order to attach the policies out of that Falder zone review into the OCP. And really it's about limiting the prospect for subdivisions and protecting water in that area by strengthening policy. So we're recommending first, second, and public hearing on that, with the public hearing to happen June 15th before the board.
Thank you. I'll go to Director Gettins. Direction on this.
Thanks, Chair. I'll move the administrative recommendation, please.
You're moving it. It's seconded, I'm assuming, from Director Roberts. Thank you. Any discussion on this one? Director Coyne, Senior, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a little, I don't know how this works when it gets to the people that bought the property when it was zoned that they could subdivide it. And now we're going to change the zoning so that they can't subdivide it. What happens to them?
CAO, do we have an answer on that?
Well, there is no zone that permits subdivision. That's a separate application to the province. And then we're a referral agency, and we have our subdivision bylaw that sort of sets out the requirements for our approval of a subdivision. And then that goes back to the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. So in the Falder area, there was never any guarantee that subdivisions would be permitted. In fact, most of the area out there outside of sort of the Falder community is resource area, which isn't identified. It's not a growth area within the regional growth strategy. So those property owners applying for subdivision are putting their case forward, and then it's up to the province to determine on subdivision. It's up to us to determine on zoning. And typically when something comes to us, it will be zoning that's required for the subdivision. In the case of Falder, what we're saying is we're putting stricter policies in the official community plan and the zoning bylaw to protect water.
Okay, follow up or?
Well, I'm just really concerned about, we've had applicants before the board that bought property there, and now we're going to take, with these changes, those people could face financial hardships due to a change in zoning. And that's never very comfortable place to be if people have bought it on credit to do these projects, and then all of a sudden we come along and change the zoning, and after they've spent their money, that makes you think about it.
Okay. I see a hand from Director Knodel. Go ahead. I think you're on mute there, Director Knodel. We're not hearing you.
That might be considered a good thing by some circles. I also am concerned about this one. It seems a little like trying to slam the door on people who've already been in that quay. So it's almost like going retroactive. The other thing is, it wasn't that long ago that I watched a subdivision being okayed in an area that definitely had some water problems in the Twin Lakes area, and that went ahead with a large number of subdivision lots being added to it. And here we're looking at a small section, and we're looking to cut them off after the fact. So it's just a little concerning to me. Thank you.
Okay, Director Monteith.
And through the chair, I fully support exactly where we're going with this. It's important when there's an area that has water scarcity. They have water challenges for many, many years. This is protecting what the residents there, they already know. They know that there's concerns with water. And honestly, I mean, with the feedback we've received, I think that staff are on the right track. I think the director knows her community out there. I think protecting who's there now, even though they can't subdivide in the future, I think they want to have water in the future as well. So knowing that if we subdivide and allow that to happen, there's a risk, a greater risk than now. So I think limiting now makes sense, and I wish we would have done that for Twin Lakes. And I'm sad that we didn't. So as a director, I fully support where we're going.
Okay, I see a hand from Director Gettins.
Thank you to the chair. Just a few comments. There's a lot of voices that we need to listen to at this table, and an applicant's one voice. And then we have the neighbors of the applicants. And then we also have the community. We have our APC, and we have our staff, and we have the studies, and we have previous studies, and we have history. So I don't want the board to focus on the loudest voice. There's a lot of people that are just very happy that we're taking this seriously and we're taking the time and we're investing in these studies. I would also like to just ask for an opportunity for the staff to clarify about removing potential zonings. I don't believe that is the case. We are protecting the water. There is no value if anybody runs out of water. So when there is a long history of a cycle of where people have had a truck in water, where people are trying to expand use of water, like it's a serious concern. And there's a lot of people that are just happy we're doing it. You can see, you can read the responses from the people that have responded. I think the communication has been outstanding. We've had more than one public information meeting. I myself have put out posters to get people involved in this. We've had staff go out and put posters on the bulletin boards. Like the letters have been mailed out. We have had opportunity, and I'm not hearing an overwhelming, please take the risk of the water. I hear from a couple applicants, absolutely, but there's a whole community voice that's just as valuable as a couple of applicants. So with that, Chair, maybe if we could just ask Mr. Garish to address that concern that Director Coyne brought forward, taking away use, that would be great.
Okay, I'll go to Mr. Garish.
Sure. So I'll add some comments, and then I might ask Shannon to add more if I've forgotten anything. But just for the board's benefit, so to the extent that the zoning changes are affecting subdivision potential within the Falder community, it's being restricted to those parcels within the water service area. And because those parcels are within a water service area that's owned and operated and administered by the RDOS, we do have a requirement that they are compelled or required to connect to our water service when undertaking subdivisions. And we know because of the existing strains and capacity issues on the Falder water system that there is no capacity to facilitate additional subdivision. So for us at the staff level, it raises a question as to what actual subdivision potential are we talking about, because there is no water to accommodate additional lots. And so the change in zoning is simply reflecting what we see as on the ground reality. And also keeping in mind too, that simply because we're making a change to the zoning doesn't preclude a property owner from submitting an application in future to have the board reconsider that zone restriction. They have that right under the Act. And if they feel they have a compelling argument to make to the board in terms of being able to provide water to an additional lot, they can always come forward and make that case to you as a board. So.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion on this? Seeing no hands. Again, this one's a rural vote. I'll call the question though. All those in favor? Thank you. Those opposed? Directors Bush, Knodel, and Coyne. Motion does carry. Thank you for that. That brings us down to item D, finance, the establishment of the Growing Communities Reserves, CAO.
So the board has decided that we will accept that $4.6 million through the Growing Communities Fund grant, Mr. Chair, and that we will divide it evenly between the 9 electoral areas. This is setting up the reserves to put that money into. So what we're recommending is that Growing Communities Reserve Fund be established for each of the 9 electoral areas, Mr. Chair.
Okay, someone willing to make that motion? Moved and seconded. Any discussion on it? Don't think I'm seeing any hands. This one is again corporate, so call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. Over to D2, a grant for the Eastgate Fire Protection Society, CAO.
So Director Coyne wants to provide $20,000 from the Electoral Area H Community Works Reserve Fund, Mr. Chair, to the Eastgate Fire Protection Society. I think for operational requirements like pumps and hoses and various other things that fire departments require. And we're recommending that that be given 3 readings and adoption.
Go to Director Coyne.
I'd like to make the administrative recommendation, please.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any discussion? We've done this fairly regularly, so looking like no questions. Corporate vote. All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. Down to CAO reports. CAO.
I do just have a couple things, Mr. Chair. First, thanks for those that responded on the Emergency Operations Center training for elected officials. So we've tried a couple different dates. We did settle on July 27th, which seems when most members were available. So we'll send out a calendar notice on that so you can get it entrenched into your calendars. But that is what has fallen out of that, Mr. Chair. Secondly, it's a pleasure to announce that we did finally get the change to our operating certificate for the Campbell Mountain landfill to allow us to use the BioCover methodology instead of having to construct an active gas capture system. So this has been going on for at least a decade. That we've been applying on this. We took over the Campbell Mountain landfill in 1972. And it was unregulated at the time, and it's one of those natural attenuation landfills that doesn't have a membrane in it. It's based on fractured rock, so there's always concerns about the methane buildup and leachate and drainage and many other issues with regards to the actual physical structure of it. But around 2014, the province has a model that they use to determine when a landfill goes from unregulated to regulated. And it's not based on any sort of physical measurement, it's based on modeling. And in their model, we crossed that threshold into a regulated landfill in about 2014. And then, as luck would have it, the act changed, and under the landfill gas regulation, regulated landfills had to have an active gas capture system. For us, that would have meant digging up the landfill, putting pipes underneath it in order to capture the methane, and then flaring it off that was the only methodology available. In fact, that's the methodology used throughout Canada. For us, that was about a $50 million project. And there was one obscure clause in the regulation that allowed us to apply for a different methodology called a substituted requirement. And that's when we came, and this this landfill gas capture regulation came into effect on January 31st, 2016. We applied in 2015 for this substituted requirement in order to use BioCover instead of putting in an active gas capture system. And it hadn't been done anywhere else in Canada. The ministry, frankly, wasn't, they were skeptical because everybody else was using the flaring system. So since that time, since 2015, we've been preparing studies. We did a pilot project using 4 different types of BioCover in order to prove that this would work. We have finally now got the approval of our operating certificate to use the BioCover. So we'll be starting on that. It's going to save us tens of millions of dollars. Some of the outcomes of that, though, what we'll want to be concerned about is in our applications, we did indicate that we were fully supportive of removing solid waste from the landfill. So we're very engaged in collection of yard waste. We're very engaged in the recycling program. And we had proposed at that time that we were going to remove organics from the Campbell Mountain landfill, which required us then to try and identify a site where we could have an organics treatment and processing facility. And we're still in the process of that because we've failed in our attempts to identify a site over the last 10 years. Nevertheless, that is still ongoing, and we're about to bring another proposal for an organic site or some manifestation of that in the near future. But anyway, the good news out of this, still lots of work to do, but the good news out of this is that our BioCover methodology has been approved, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. I think Director Coyne has a question or comment.
A bit of both. So at FCM, I spoke to a company that kind of deals with some of this stuff, and I was going to bring it to committee hopefully next meeting. I'll send you their information. The company is owned out of Langley, but they have a plant in Nova Scotia, and they make a pellet product out of bio waste, and they can also take recyclables and separate them from, so like your paper cups that everybody thinks recyclable, they're actually not. They've got a plastic lining in them. They separate that out and they turn it into a pellet, and then they take the plastics and make a synthetic fuel out of it. So they have some pretty cool technology. So I was gonna link them up with the regional district because they need about 90,000, I think, to 100,000 people to make it a viable operation. So it could be possible for us.
Sure, go ahead.
We're always interested in alternatives, Mr. Chair. And I should say, I mean, there are a couple of facilities in Area H that accept food waste and biosolids. So what we're working on now is the business cases to what's the most efficient methodology in order for us to remove that type of material from our landfill. So we're looking at all options.
Okay, good to hear. I would just add to that BioCover land subject is, I think we've been through probably at least 3 different boards when we started this. So not everybody's aware of the fact that the pilot projects that we undertook and tested actually had better results as far as the greenhouse gas emissions than flaring it the way that they wanted us to do it. So this is probably the better route to go environmentally, financially, but it took us forever to get there. I see a hand from Director Roberts.
Thank you to the chair. A quick question, and I'm wondering if this is something that also helps with the Karameus transfer, the old landfill at Karameus. Is this something then that opens the door and makes it more possible that we don't have the same cost? Because I know Mr. Reeder was working on that and has done some great things, and I wasn't sure if part of that was tied to the acceptance of the biocover.
I'm not sure. CAO?
I know they were withholding our design operations closure plan for the Karameus landfill pending the biocover application. So it certainly has an implication on it as to what will shake out as costs. I'm not sure.
I can't answer that either, so time will tell, I guess, on that part. Okay, moving on. Chair's report. The only other deal I was going to mention was, I think it's Monday, there's a grand opening of the Oliver compost facility. So that's on the agenda. We've still got to work on the one up here, though. Director's motions. Anything under director's motions? Seeing none there. Board members' verbal updates. Anything from the board and from their communities? Director Coyne, Senior, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd just like to let everybody know that the new Coalmont Fire Hall is open and had their first call a couple of weeks ago already, but they had the grand opening on Saturday and everything went well. So it's all good.
Nice.
It's amazing what a bunch of volunteers can do.
Yeah, that's a fact. I seen a hand from Director Monteith.
Thank you, through the chair. So the Cleveland Volunteer Fire Department, their chief, Chief Gaudry, has retired. And I want to give a big thank you to our RDOS communication staff and Mr. Newell for getting a great press release out there. And we have an acting chief, Chief Madeira. Also, the Cleveland Volunteer Fire Department has their annual garage sale this weekend. So it's one of the largest fundraisers for our community fire department, and hope to see you all there.
Okay, go ahead, Director Coyne.
It's not so much a update, but I guess as my role as vice chair, people like to confide in me. There's been a lot of concern from members around this table that information from in-camera meetings has been given to newspapers and the media. And I just want to remind everybody around this table that what is said in camera needs to stay in camera. It opens up yourself and the board to litigation, and we need to respect the fact that if we're in camera, that it is a safe place to say the things that are said, and it needs to stay there until it becomes public. Okay, that's it.
Okay, I think that was where Director Taylor was heading at the last time he brought that up. So that's just out there. There's no accusations. It's just in camera should stay in camera. Fair enough comment. Anything else from board members' verbal updates? Director Holmes.
Yeah, just a reminder that this weekend is Action Fest in Summerland. So if you can navigate your way around the slide, which is still there, come on out. There's going to be lots of music, and I'll be participating in the 5.5K Giants Head Run. Probably bring up the rear, but we'll see how that goes. Better than the 10K run, but you can do that too. And then there's the slow pitch tournament, of course, lots of music. So just come on up. Thanks.
Okay.
Can I get Summerland? You can go through Princeton to get to Summerland?
Yeah, the roundabout way. Anything further from anybody? Seeing no hands, we will ask for a motion to adjourn. Moved, seconded, thank you. All those in favor? Perfect, any opposed? Great, we are adjourned, but I am going to have to ask Director Knodel to pick up on the committee meeting from this morning. I believe we've got staff in the room and ready to go, so over to you, Director Knodel.
Thank you, Chair Pendergraft. I'm back. The next item on the list was the draft electoral EOCP bylaw, number 3010. CAO Noel, would you care to give us the preamble?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So Mr. Garish has a presentation, or Ms. Reichert, I'm not sure which one, on this. We've had this on our docket since 2020. Area E being the greater Naramata area is a complex in transition area and has been over the last couple of years, so there's a lot of issues. We are required by policy to bring an issues paper forward to the board prior to the draft OCP. So we're now prepared to bring forward some of the more substantive issues that have come up during the discussions about the Area E official community plan, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, CAO Noel. Mr. Garish, do your worst, please.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to pass it over to Evelyn, who's done some great work on this, helping us to keep the project moving as we've transitioned to various staff since, as the CIO indicated, this project was put on in 2020. So with that, I'll pass it over to Evelyn.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm glad that you can listen to me, even though it wasn't this morning. Otherwise, it would have been like a major delay again. Oops, how do I? Oh, there. Yeah, sorry. What is technology here? So yeah, Area E OCP. It's always a challenge and an opportunity when you start looking at a community and you know, the challenges and opportunities around that. So this presentation is going to quickly go through background of the current OCP, the process that has gone through to date, and then highlighting some of the larger significant changes that this OCP proposes. And with that, there's also some directions that we've required from the board, because there's been, you know, a few unresolved issues. So we're asking for direction on that. And then quickly next steps. So as I said, a new OCP, it's always time to look at your electoral area, and electoral area E is within the South Okanagan. It has a growth strategy. You know, there's other forces in play, the liquid waste management plan, you know, the type of character the community desires, climate action, and then always the ongoing, how do we engage with the community is always a challenge. So that's kind of a summary. And then as director or the chair, Mr. Newell said, this is a land use bylaw transition policy that the board has, is that prior to first reading of this bylaw, it come to the board to outline significant changes and also if there's any current subdivisions that might be impacted. So the electoral area E, the current one was adopted in 2006. And we went through the repeal and reenactment in 2008, but that left the policies generally unchanged. There's been a lot of amendments since 2006, 2005. Interestingly enough, the first zoning, if you're interested in history, for electoral area E was 1972, and the first OCP was adopted in 1982. So there's been land use regulations for quite some time out there. And the review of this particular OCP was identified in the 2020 business plan. Since 2006, when this OCP was first adopted, there's already been a number of significant changes, and a lot of these are regional wide, so they've been changed in a number of OCPs, including vacation rental policy, the ESDP update, accessory dwellings, and cannabis, and so on. The project itself was done mostly in-house. So I'm just going to talk briefly about the process. Their initial community engagement was completed by a company called Local Decisions, and some of you may recognize this name. It's the previous director, Director Bryden. This is his consulting firm, so he helped with the initial process for engagement. It was decided at that time that there wouldn't be a committee appointed for this process, but they would instead use a larger community advisory group. So there was like 20, 25 people that were sort of part of this advisory group, but they weren't appointed. And at that time, I think there was hopes to finish the OCP before the last director finished, but there were some staff changes, and then there was an election. So there was a pause, and then I think the community advisory group sort of had gone through a lot of work and wanted some time to pause and talk amongst themselves prior to sort of going through the rest of the process. So it has delayed it, but we are, coming close to the end. So the community engagement process that was done, and again, this is Director Bryden's technique. It's a 3-round survey that they did in 2021 and 22. It's an iterative approach, so people can keep coming online and people are added to it. And it's really about trade-offs and compromises. So it's about what you like and dislike, but also he really tries to focus attention on the fact that you can't, as a community, you can't have everything like tick, 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 tick. I want everything. It's like, there's going to be some trade-offs and compromises along with that. And so he does, and so then there's some scenarios that are created through that process. And through that process, there's a vision. I won't read it out loud, but there's 2 paragraphs. Basically, that it's a rural area, there's farmland, and then Naramata Village it is an important hub for the electoral area. It's a vibrant place, and they support year-round businesses. And just to tick off that one subject, there are no current applications, subdivision applications right now that the OCP is going to impact at all. The OCP has been changed and tweaked, and different sections have been made, but this is the highlight of the significant policy changes that I'm going to be exploring with you. So the community profile, this has actually been a really expanded section. We've updated all the demographic data. We've updated the housing data through that was done. And also, importantly, we've expanded the section that includes Penticton Indian Band assessment. They were hired or contracted out to review Area E from their perspective, and they did present this OCP assessment. So even though some of it is confidential, we've taken out pieces of it and put in their perspective in the community profile. So I think that is a really nice update. Growth management. Well, okay, here we come to one of the big hot topics. There was a bit of confusion because the regional growth strategy was also being updated last year. So there was discussion about what the growth areas should be. Right now, the current RGS just has it designates Naramata as a rural growth area, and it just kind of has a blob on the map, like it doesn't have any defining lines around it. And so part of the job of the OCP is to define lines around your growth area. This was controversial. There was a number of recommendations put forward. And so what we are proposing for the OCP is generally, it's a compromise. It's a layering approach, which we can do in the OCP. So we are looking at layering these growth containment boundaries to an A, B, and C area. And just to go over that kind of quickly. So Area A is just slightly larger than what is designated as Naramata Village Center now. So it's really where we want to focus commercial, mixed use, and maybe some higher type of density. So maybe townhouses or just, those kind of things to expand the downtown. The Area B that you can see there, that's sort of for short-term, mid-term growth. And this is actually very similar to what the residents of Naramata had proposed as their growth area. It basically follows the base of the hill. So if you can picture Naramata, there's a bench, and then it sort of goes low to where the village is. And so they had proposed and recommended that the boundary of the growth area be in that lower area. And coincidentally, it also is very, very similar to what the LWMP, the Liquid Waste Management Plan, is proposing for phase 1. So it's kind of a nice synergy for that area. And then Area C is kind of the larger, longer term area. And again, it's very similar to what phase 2 of the Liquid Waste Management Plan is proposing. And essentially that's the area to the west of the ALR boundary or lands. Naramata is quite distinct geographically. You've got the settlement area, then you have this whole ring of agricultural land, and then you have residentials kind of above that. So everything below the agricultural lands is going to be considered where growth should be directed for the long term. Another thing that's new for this electoral area, and some of you have the local area policies in your OCP already, is looking kind of at traditional settlement areas. And so we've come up with sort of a Naramata proper, which is like the lower Naramata, and then kind of the upper Naramata. And the upper Naramata includes all that residential development that is sort of the low density residential, all those strata lots and so on, and also sort of a ring of privately held lands that are a mix of maybe small holdings, maybe large holdings, but it excludes, the resource area above that. Because what came out in the consultation and so on is that there's very different ideas of what the community wants up on the hill versus what they want in sort of the lower area. So we have a set of different policies. We've also touched on Falcon Ridge and Indian Rock as local areas. So in the lower Naramata area, I mean, we have policies that support more infill there, sort of gentle infill. And again, considering the Naramata center lands, and they've been, thinking and talking about redeveloping that. So there's a policy supporting maybe some mixed residential densities if that's the way they choose to go. It does support the community sewer system. And again, there's some advocacy policies encouraging MOT to consider traffic calming and so on, and also just showcasing kind of the heritage values in that area. For Upper Naramata, we heard loud and clear that they really want to discourage any further residential subdivision on the hillside. That's based on, current, issues and problems and so on. So there is a policy discouraging further low density residential subdivision up there. And again, encourages MOT to review traffic movement, because that certainly came up as an issue. And also there's a policy to just consider exploring options for regulating hillside development. In the resource area, not too much has changed, but we are introducing mapping of the designated community watersheds. There's 4 of them in electoral area E, which are not currently in the OCP. And as a result of these community watersheds, then the zoning will be updated to include a watershed resource area. I think area H has something similar. The administrative cultural institution has been expanded and updated, so updated to show the fire district map. It also updates policies around heritage and culture values, which is important to the community. And we also have a whole new section on community social well-being, and that fits into a lot of policies that the community felt were important. Economics, cultural diversity, all those kind of aspects that are important to the community, but needed to go into a policy. So things like supporting outdoor markets and those kind of things all go into this section. Natural hazards. We've updated this for flooding and geohazard lands. We've included the newer OBWB flood mapping data. We've also included an older provincial study. They did an alluvial fan study back in 1994, sort of for the Naramata and some of the creeks around there. So we've included that as well. Community infrastructure. This is a section we've amalgamated sort of all the infrastructure, whether it's RDOS sort of responsibility or not. So it includes transportation, water and sewer, stormwater, street lighting, solid waste management. You can see on the map on the side there's it's the Campbell Mountain landfill on the left because that's within the city of Penticton, and then sort of there's that line kind of going down the RDOS, and that one property is where the proposed, I think, composting facility is going. And so what we're showing is a 500-meter buffer zone, and again, that's per the provincial regulations to discourage sensitive development. Under the street lighting, we also acknowledge the Naramata's desire to become an international dark sky community. climate action and mitigation, we've taken up new data from the 2020 climate change for the Okanagan, Okanagan region. And there's three main objectives: reducing greenhouse gas, achieving carbon neutral 40 RDOS, and then supporting climate change adaptation and mitigation strategies. So now it comes to the time that you guys get to talk and let us know what you're thinking. So there's four issues that we want some direction on that, you know, we're basically kind of unresolved with what the community had sort of told us what they wanted and what staff is kind of recommending. So I'll just quickly go through all four. Is that what you want me to do? And then you can go back and come up with, you know, talk about each one. So vacation rentals, as we found out this morning, and as we know, is a pretty hot topic, especially in Naramata. There's a lot of concerns. The staff recommendation is to wait until the regional review is completed, because we do have vacation rentals that are across the entire South Okanagan and not sort of individual ones. The option would be at this point in the OCP to introduce policies discouraging vacation rentals in Naramata. But there's, you know, I mean, you need to be that there's an awareness that there's consequences with that if we just start discouraging vacation rentals in Naramata when the next TOPs come up. So that is some direction. Number one. The second one was the hillside development option. There was a lot of concern about drainage and stormwater and so on going on with the development that was going up on the hillside. You know, the community did some of their own homework and recommended that we do a hillside development permit. And staff is thinking that it may not be a development permit that is the best way to solve any of these problems. I mean, there needs to be some more exploration of what all the problems are, what the options are for managing and regulating hillside. It may be zoning, it may be some other bylaw. So we're recommending as an implementation item to explore options for managing, regulating hillside development. The growth management options, I showed you that map in a previous slide. And so we are basically asking for recommendations or confirmation, I suppose, that we look at a layered approach to contain growth. If that is not the direction the board chooses, then we would need to amend the growth area somehow. And I don't know what that is at this point. The climate action options as well. Staff recommendation is that we don't include an introduction of a development permit to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which is now under the Local Government Act, something that can be done. We feel that there's enough policies in the climate action and just general sustainability policies for growth in the OCP that creating a DP for that doesn't seem to be something that at this point makes sense. And so the question would be, do we go down the road of introducing a development permit? And that's basically what I want to talk about. The next steps in this process, we're going to refer the draft OCP to the agencies. We'll do that pretty much right away. They have 45 days to respond. We're planning on meeting with the community advisory group on June 22nd to go over the significant changes and hear, you know, what they're thinking and comments, and hopefully then start the final round of a community engagement to finalize the draft OCP and then, knock on wood, first and second reading by August. And that is all that I wanted to say. So.
Thank you, Ms. Richter. I see retirement is treating you well. I think you did now than when you were working for a living. With that, I'll open the floor to questions. One thing I do want to know, does this require a motion to move things forward, or is this just a discussion with direction, staff direction?
Yeah, through the chair, the report that has come to the Planning and Development Committee does actually have a number of recommendations for you. So if, yeah, I don't know actually what happens. If they're approved, then it gets forwarded and the minutes of this meeting get approved at the next meeting.
Very good. So it does go forward as an emotion and not just a staff direction. Very good. Thank you. I'll open the floor to questions, comments. Director, oh God. I'm having a senior's moment here. Director
Gilbert?
Yeah, got it.
Thanks through the chair. Just a bunch of questions on those points. So the first question I have in regards to vacation rentals, if you were to enact some type of bylaw on vacation rentals in Naramata, how do you plan on enforcing that, and what methods would you use for enforcement on it? And then just a question about Naramata when it comes to water treatment and sewage, is the RDOS paying for that service for the facilities there in Naramata for the water treatment and sewage?
Thank you. I believe Mr. Garish is probably the one for that one.
I can handle the first one, but you can talk about it.
Here,
Yeah,
split it up between you.
through the chair. The vacation rental topic, those are great questions. We don't know. Basically, that's kind of what, when we did that survey, so we've got, feedback from a lot of people in the region, but in terms of moving forward on how that's going to look for the regional district, we don't have any, I don't know. We don't know. Basically, in terms of how it's going to be enforced or what the board wants to do.
I might just jump in for a sec. So if we incorporated the policy direction that the community is asking, what would happen is TUP applications for vacation rentals in Naramata, when they came forward, if the policy direction we now have from the board is that we discourage these, staff would basically be recommending against each one that came forward, right?
Thank you, sir. Any other questions or comments?
Can I just do a follow-up to that?
Yes, sure, you can. Thank you, Director Gilbert.
Thanks, through the chair. That's fine that you would reject any application for short-term rentals, but there's also the active enforcement of it, because as you've seen in Penticton, we allow it, and we have 322 that are registered business licenses, but then there's a bunch of 200 more that are illegal. So, yes, you could discourage it and to say we don't want this in our community. However, with that is what other budget and enforcement are you going to do to ensure that those things come up? Because it's discouraging is one thing, but as someone who's an enforcement officer who's worked in parks, I could scream at the top of my lungs for people not to do things in the parks, but they're going to do it anyways. And this is the same case with vacation rentals. You can discourage it, but they're still going to do it illegally. So I guess my question with that was, have you looked at what resources are you going to have bylaw look into that? Are you going to have a set, we use a third party to sift through Airbnb and VRBO to look for illegal rentals. So yes, discouraging is one thing, but that also has to be backed up by actual enforcement.
Mr. Garish, please.
Yeah, I take all those points, and from our perspective, it underscores why we feel what the community is asking is premature, because we haven't had that discussion with the board yet about how you would like to do enforcement going forward. So if we simply change a policy on, I don't mean to say on the fly now with OCP review, but in the context of this forthcoming broader review of vacation rentals without addressing these other issues, we think this isn't the time to make that type of policy change.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions? Director Federico, do you want to move forward with anything?
Thank you, through the chair. I do have some comments, but I just kind of wanted to hear from the rest of the board, just some thoughts before I jump in with mine. So I believe Director Miller has his hand up.
Thank you. Director Miller?
I'd just like to add a point to Mr. Laban's presentation this morning, and my apologies to the Penticton directors, because I've spoken ad nauseum on limiting it to primary residence only for short-term rentals. But in terms of the complaint and nuisance aspect, just because not everybody that's upset about it necessarily calls bylaw, and I've since learned I have a family member, upscale Victoria neighborhood, Airbnb next door, but he and his wife are the people that don't want to annoy the neighbors. They don't want to upset. They're pacifists, sort of, so they just kind of tolerate it and then complain to everybody else. And secondly, staff doesn't necessarily always get the complaints, whereas I think quite often it will be the elected officials who are the ones that are being told by the public that, you know, they're nuisance properties and they quite frankly don't want to live next door to Club Med. So it appears as though a lot of the enforcement in terms of noise is complaint driven, but there are a lot of people who are either frightened to annoy their neighbors or just simply don't want to annoy their neighbors and don't speak up. So it's another thing to consider for limiting it to primary residents only.
Thank you, sir. Director Holmes, please.
Yeah, thank you. So regarding the, I don't know how many alluvial fans there are in Naramata or what the impact is, but if it is seen as a concern with respect to development or whatnot, it might be worth talking to the OBWB, who are doing quite a bit of work right now on alluvial fans and their impact. It could be, you might get, I don't know if they're looking directly at Naramata. I know they're looking at other areas in the Okanagan, and it might be worth just speaking to them. It might, you could get probably further information or an update from the provincial study that was done at the time. So just a suggestion. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Holmes. Any other directors?
Thank you through the chair. I'll try and keep it broad and kind of touch on everything because it's kind of this package deal for the OCP. So vacation rentals are a challenge in the area. I appreciate that staff want to hold off until we've done a broader review. I'm hoping that broader review will come sooner rather than later, or director's motions will keep coming forward that we need to look at this because it's incredibly important in our area. It's not that the community doesn't want them. They much prefer to see that there's someone living on site just to be able to help with the challenge of housing. In the values, we say that we want to be a stronger community, and we've put in there our social well-being. And we're just finding that the empty homes that are happening, that are being used for the commercial aspect, is impacting the social well-being and the community feel. So vacation rentals in that term is super important, but I do support in here waiting until a broader study is done and we have a regional approach to the vacation rental. So that one I'm okay with right now. Growth management, there's been lots of conversations, and I think staff did a great job with the layered approach. I'm interested to see how the rest of the advisory committee sees it. We had I don't know how many meetings on just growth and different maps. And so this is a great blend, I think, of all the opinions that came forward. So thank you for that. I do also appreciate the local policies by splitting Naramata into Lower Naramata and Upper Naramata. Again, interested to see how the advisory committee feels about that, but I think it's hard to define the different areas in Naramata, and you can't really just lump them all together. So I think this is a good blend on how we can do that, and I do appreciate including Indian Rock and Falcon Ridge. Falcon Ridge mainly looking at what's developing and happening in Penticton, I think is important to see how that community is going to fit in with that broader plan. So I appreciate that being in there. Lower Naramata, my only concern is the suggestion of apartment buildings, depending on height of buildings and look and feel. I know the community doesn't really appreciate that type of housing. So again, interesting to see how the rest of the community and the advisory committee is going to react there. Climate action plan, that point again, happy to see how things evolve and develop region-wide. And then last one, the hillside development. It has been a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to some of the development that's taking place. I appreciate that if staff feel that there are different ways that we can approach it. Looking at the maps that were included for hazardous lands, I would like a study to be done because looking at some of the ESDP and the wildfire that was included in there, there's some whole communities and whole areas that were excluded that are either very heavily treed, which would be, you would think of wildfire risk that have been just removed from the mapping. So however we can get that onto a list of things to do, hazardous land study out that way would be wonderful. So overall, long story short, happy with where that's going, but just wanted to put that out there.
Are you, Director Taylor, please?
I had a question, I guess, to Director Federico through the chair.
Certainly.
Where does the community sit in terms of densification? And like that picture just shows houses all along Upper Naramata. So what's the future?
Director Federico?
If I'm not putting you on the spot too much, like I'm just kind of stumped.
That is a wonderful question. Thank you through the chair to Director Taylor. Density is a lengthy conversation that happens in the community as well. Going through the liquid waste management process right now, both sides of the coin on that one between densifying in sort of that, if you look at the growth map, sort of A, B, and C, those areas in the lower part of Naramata. There's concerns, there's both sides. People don't want the density, they don't want the housing, but then then you won't have necessarily attainable housing. We won't have affordable housing, but it might be attainable for some. We have families whose children can't afford to live in the area, but one of the ways that is perceived that can happen is through density. So it's a broader conversation we're having with the community to see how we can move forward into the future and what that looks like in terms of our housing stock and variety.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Director Coyne Senior.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the wrong time to ask this, but have you looked at making provisions for alternative housing in that area? We ran into one there the other week with the mobile home up in West Bench there, not mobile home, but a travel trailer. And, we run into them all the time over in our area with the, what do you call it, the park models and things like that. Is there wiggle room in the plan for if we ever come up with a policy or whatever it takes to deal with some of these things? Is there room in the plan for that?
Mr. Garish?
Absolutely. But I mean, I don't need to remind the board, I think your top project for this year is the alternative housing review / strategy. And similar to my comments on vacation rentals, our preference would be to have that separate project be completed and see what recommendations come out of it, and then make amendments to all the official community plans to reflect, what needs to occur in each community. So we envision that not necessarily at this point with the Area E OCP, but in future, once it's completed, that there will be amendments that we can make.
Thank you, sir.
So we could just add to it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, Director Federico, do you want to move this forward?
Yeah, I'll move forward the staff recommendation.
Seconder? Director Monteith? Any further discussion on the question? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. Thank you kindly. Next item, meetings of the Board of Variance, CAO. Would you care to bring this forward?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I believe Mr. Garish does have a presentation on this one as well, but it is a requirement, a regulatory requirement for a regional district to have a Board of Variance. And we do, and we have a bylaw that sets out terms and conditions and various policies. And as society changes, so does requirements for some of our lay committees. So we have a proposal that we're prepared to make to committee to more or less change how our Board of Variance meets in order to address those societal changes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Garish, please.
Great, thank you. And through the chair, I've just got a few slides, so hopefully I don't take too much more of your time today. So just some statutory background. So as the CAO was just indicating, any local government that has adopted a zoning bylaw must, under the legislation, have a Board of Variance established. And so ours dates back to some of the first bylaws that the RD adopted back in the late 60s. And so we've had one for, I guess, 56 years now. And it's an interesting body. It's an independent statutory tribunal. It can make decisions that the board can sometimes make in relation to rezonings and development variance permits, but in the context of the Board of Variance, the applicant has to be demonstrating an undue hardship. So the Board of Variance itself, it's a three-person group that's appointed by the RDOS board. Their term, I believe, is a maximum of 3 years, which is a bit awkward given that the board's term is now 4 years. So we're constantly having to make sure we haven't had their appointments lapse. It's not a very busy group. Between the 3 years between 2017 and 2019, they were dealing with about 5 to 6 applications a year. Then the last 3-year time span has been reduced to about 2 applications a year. Now, I've put this slide on here because this was actually one of the properties that we had to try to schedule a meeting of the Board of Variance at. And historically, my understanding, and I think this goes back decades, we've generally tried to have the Board of Variance meet on the property that's under application. So this one presented a bit of a logistical challenge, and so kind of put it on our radar that we had an issue with how the Board of Variance was meeting. I can't recall off the top of my head, but I suspect that the meeting actually occurred on the side of the highway with the island in view, with the applicant giving us a rundown of what they were hoping to do. Now, more recently, within the last month or so, we've had another meeting, and this is from West Bench, where again, we tried to schedule the meeting on what is effectively private property, right? And not necessarily a neutral location. And in this particular instance, I guess there's existing animosity between the neighbors over the issue that the Board of Variance was considering. And when staff arrived, things were fairly heated, and the meeting ended up occurring again on the road with the Board of Variance attendees and staff having to move to one side or the other depending on traffic coming down. So again, not really an ideal venue to be having these kind of meetings. So what we'd like to discuss with you today, the issues with how we've been doing this historically, and, maybe giving consideration to a change. And so I've just highlighted here what I kind of ran through with those last slides, just some of the concerns. It's not a neutral site. It is private property. We don't always know what the relationship between the property owner and their neighbors is. That may discourage neighbors from coming forward and attending the Board of Variance meeting. Yes, they do have the option to provide written comments, but we feel that if it was a neutral site, it may be more conducive to encouraging them to come and attend a meeting. Obviously, there's safety concerns, access concerns. We are asking people to come onto private property. And also by having these meetings out on site, obviously just with all the changes that have occurred within the last 3 years since COVID, it makes it very difficult, if not impossible, for us to provide online participation for people who may not be able to attend in person. So taking inspiration from the recent discussion that we had with the board on APCs and, their meeting schedules, we feel that, applying a similar approach to the Board of Variance has a lot of merit. And so what we'd like the board to consider is that we make changes to the Board of Variance bylaw and schedule the BOV meetings to occur once a month. We've canvassed the existing Board of Variance members, their preferences for the third Monday of each month, and that'll be here at the RDOS board, room 101 Martin Street. And that if we do that, obviously neighbors, anybody else with an interest would still be able to attend in person, albeit here in the office, but we'd also have the ability, as we have today, to offer electronic participation for neighbors, even for property owners who might not live in the area and would prefer not to have to drive up for a meeting. Of course, because we're looking at the meeting section of the Board of Variance bylaw in proposing these changes, we felt that there was also some benefits just adding a few more regulations and clarifying some existing ones. And so this is just kind of a summary highlight of some of those other changes. I believe you have an annotated version of the amendment bylaw attached to the report, which gives a bit more context on what the existing wording is versus what we're proposing. But just clarifying that 2 members is a quorum for the Board of Variance, establishing an order for presentations to the Board of Variance, clarifying again that the Board of Variance, much like the APCs, can make a decision in the absence of the applicant. Clarifying too, because this does come up on occasion, for a property owner or neighbor, they really should only be approaching Board of Variance members in the context of a formal meeting, public meeting that's been scheduled and notified, not trying to do it on the side. And finally, that if we do move to this like set meeting schedule, that we introduce a provision that allows the Board of Variance to schedule a special meeting in case there's an event that requires something to happen outside of the 3rd Monday of every month. So that's it in a nutshell, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions that directors might have.
Thank you, sir. Any questions? Director Kenton, please.
Yeah, thank you to the chair. I really like where this was going. I attended my first Board of Variance meeting ever. That was the one that we saw on the screen. And I think it's uncomfortable for both sides. It's uncomfortable for even the property owner because neighbors are welcome to come to these meetings. You don't really know who's coming. You're meant to, wait, sort of allow everybody to go on your property and take a look around. And when that isn't the best way of approaching the conversation, and people were out on the road, and it felt a little chaotic. And there was a layer that was removed that we have in the boardroom where we have a chair and there's sort of an official way of doing things and then communication and how we address one another. So I'm really in favor of this. Mike, I just have a quick question for the representation directly to the Board of Variance meeting. Do you mean the letters from the neighbors can only be given to the Board of Variance members at the meeting? Is that the point?
Gary?
Through the chair, so if the intent of the neighbor is to directly provide letters to a Board of Variance member, I mean, they're free to submit them to the regional district at any time, and we'll bring them forward at the meeting. But if they're intending to try to hand it off directly to a Board of Variance member, we want to clarify that that really shouldn't be happening outside of a meeting, because we suspect that it's also going to be some lobbying occurring, and those discussions should really happen at the actual meeting of the Board of Variance itself.
Okay, so sorry, just as a clarifying point then, so if a neighbor or the applicant has a letter, they provide it to the regional district gives it to the Board of Variance as part of their package, so the Board of Variance can read it before they come to the meeting, and it's so people don't hand things around the regional district, like they don't sidestep the regional district. Is that correct?
George, please.
Yeah, through the chair, that's correct.
Thank you. Director Gilbert.
Thank you through the chair. Just a clarifying question for myself. Is RDOS required to have a Board of Variance through the Local Government Act?
Garish?
Yes, all local governments with a zoning bylaw are required to have a Board of Variance. So we are, I know all the member municipalities have a zoning bylaw, so they're all required to have Board of Variance as well. But I will say also, I know a lot of Board of Variances elsewhere are moribund, not always used, but that it is a legislative requirement.
Thank you. Director Kenton, again?
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to move the administrative recommendation, please.
Thank you. Seconder, Director Coyne Jr. Any further discussion on this? Director Holmes, please.
Yeah, just a question. If it only meets a couple times a year, but it's regularly scheduled every month, it seems to me a lot of administrative time will be spent just canceling meetings. Wouldn't it make more sense just to schedule them as required?
Mr. Garish, please.
I don't disagree. There will be an administrative requirement just to notify the board that there is no meeting scheduled for that particular month. But as with the APCs, we have a standard template email that we just recycle for those purposes and send out. So it's not going to be a lot of work to cancel a meeting.
Thank you, sir. Director Gettins, please.
Yeah, thanks. Just as a follow-up for this past one, there's quite a bit of administrative work trying to find a meeting that would work with everyone's schedule because there wasn't a preset date. So it probably took a good couple of weeks to find a date that would work with vacations of the Board of Variance and the neighbors and the applicants as well. So a preset date, I think, is handy.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. Looking for a motion to come out of the, oh, God.
Adjourn.
Development, to adjourn the Planning and Development Committee. Yeah, getting older. Thank you, Director Gettins. Is there a seconder? Director Rodrigo, all in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. Back to the chair. Thank you kindly, everyone.
Oh, thank you, everybody, for your patience, and we got through it. Perfect. Job well done. See you next meeting.